Today's session of the Business and Trade Select Committee and our inquiry into industrial policy in the UK. Today we are looking at the role of the key institutions in our country in helping make sure that industrial policy is a roaring success. So we are absolutely delighted to be welcoming some of our key mayors to the House of Commons today. Thank you so much for joining us. Andy Burnham is running slightly late, so he will arrive through that door in about 10 to 15 minutes' time. And then we're going to hear from some of the key finance institutions in our country. And then I'm delighted that we have got the leaders of our key research and development institutions who are going to be joining us for our third panel. But Kim, maybe I could start with you. Could you just give us your view on whether the government can achieve its very ambitious growth objectives without mayors? How important are mayors in helping the government deliver that overall growth objective?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that mayors are, in my opinion, fundamental to delivery of growth in all parts of the country. And I really do firmly believe, as the mayor for the region that is furthest away from Westminster in England, that we have to be going for growth in all parts of the country, and that mayors are effectively, through combined authorities and local areas, the delivery vehicle for growth. And we're able to do that in a number of ways. We provide the bridge, I think, oftentimes between those national and international investors in our region, central government joining the picture together. We are leading our regional growth plans, which feed directly into the national industrial strategy, looking at what key sectors of growth we can excel at, and then putting regional resource behind making sure that we're accelerating those, and also providing that link with government so that we can draw in national investment as well. And then, because of the scale of powers that we have around skills, around transport and infrastructure, around housing, as well as those investment levers, we're able to join up and break down the silos so that we can use those tools to drive growth. And I think all of those things are fundamental to our ability to look, as I said, at growth across all parts of the country. But what is really crucial is to do that, we need the support of government, particularly with investment in things like infrastructure going alongside the drive for growth.
Okay. Howard, Kim is the furthest from Westminster. You're probably the closest to Westminster. I mean, what's your view about whether government can achieve its growth objectives without mayors?
No, I think Kim's exactly right. If you look at the strongest economies across the G7, one of the things they have in common is they've all got very strong, stable regional government systems. It's one of the ways in which you have a greater local focus on place, which is a key part of the industrial strategy. So place-based developments, place-based regeneration, clustering. In our case, a sort of what we're calling a galaxy of clusters in London, a sort of multi-centric city. And also that engagement with businesses directly, as well as being able to bring to bear some of the regional support that Kim mentioned. So I think if you didn't have mayors, you'd have to invent them to deliver a good national growth strategy.
So Kim, you've gone through a long list of things there. Why can mayors do things that ministers can't? What makes mayors special contrasted to ministers? What can you do that ministers can't?
I think a lot of it is that place-based proximity. And so, you live and breathe in your area, a specific understanding of what is needed in that place, what the kind of skills gaps are, what the key industries are that you can drive in your region, what the transport and infrastructure requirements are in order to get that growth. And effectively we're in it, we live it, we breathe it, we are part of our regions in a way that a minister just couldn't hope to be across the whole country. And so that is one of the key things. But I think on top of that, with the devolved powers, and I would caveat anything I say with the fact that I think we need more of them, and I think we need more devolution into regions. With the devolved powers, you can draw together those levers and really enhance the role that government can play by leading from a region and making those links.
Howard, what's your view?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I'll give an example. We've recently discussed with the government the position of Oxford Street. Oxford Street has been. Do you know? This might surprise people. I know members around the moon might visit Oxford Street from time to time. It's still the number one by footfall, the number one shopping street in Europe. Despite the fact that actually it's had a rough few years. You've seen a proliferation of American candy stores, some empty shops, quite a little bit of change. Obviously, it's been hit by COVID. It's had the big benefit of the Elizabeth line going in, which was obviously championed by the mayor, successive mayors, and delivered by Mayor of London. But it's something that a local authority couldn't have taken on the real transformation of Oxford Street by itself, and isn't something that would have obviously been a national government priority to focus on. So that sort of regionally important thing, like an Oxford Street, is something where we can put in a mayoral development corporation, which is, I should say, subject to consultation that's happening this week. We can work with the local authority on plans for transformation of the street. We can bring the landowners, the retailers, investors, philanthropists together and do a deal on the redevelopment of the street, and we can do that sort of focus on an area which in this case is relatively small, but an NDC type area which necessarily national government wouldn't have the time and the focus to concentrate on.
It sounds like it's a combination of intelligence and insight plus that brokerage role that you're able to both perform.
Yes, and I think on top of that, it's the direct delivery. As a mayor, you will get in there with your elbows out, you will, bring the convening power within the region, bring government to the table at the right moment. And I think what we're getting used to now with that role of regional, so local government, regional government, and national government, is that actually where there is a mayor and where there is a combined authority, there's capacity to develop those business cases, to think through, if actually you were to look at, for example, cluster development on offshore wind, we are best placed to know kind of what it is, where are the gaps in the supply chain that we need to fill, we're best placed to support that kind of clustering and that convening, we're best placed to know when to knock on the door of, of DBT or the OFI and say, look, this is an investment that's really worthwhile and here it is, fully worked through, ready to go as a growth proposition for Britain, alongside our regional investment as well.
You can also bring kinetic energy.
Yeah, all of that.
To get stuff done.
Absolutely, getting stuff done. I think that direct delivery role on behalf of mayors can't be overlooked. It's really crucial.
Okay, thank you. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Chair. You may be aware that the committee, in December last year, one of the first things we did after we were formed was actually do a tour of the UK. I'm afraid we didn't get to the northeast, but maybe that's something we can do in the future. But we did go to Manchester. We did spend some time in London, Scotland, Wales, and other regions. What came across was consistently the same messages, and that was about energy skills, energy cost skills, infrastructure particularly, and lack of access to finance, the distance rate from London. So just really interested to hear what you see in terms of the role that national policy plays and impacts on you as local leaders, and how you think local or mayors can have a greater role in influencing policy and affecting these opportunities.
Shall I have a crack at that? So I'll take skills, for example. We're in an interesting position in London. Skills weren't originally part of the remit of the Mayor of London, and they were delegated to the Mayor 6 years ago under the previous government. Now, that means we get the money, but it comes with lots of strings attached. So, for example, this is part of my responsibility as Deputy Mayor. We've got some programmes that we're running that aren't really working, but we can't stop running those programmes and take the money off that and give it to another programme that is working, which to me seems counterproductive, frankly.
Be candid, Howard.
Yeah,
you're amongst friends here. If you think it's mad, you should just say
it's not good.
Yeah.
Having full devolution of that budget to be able to target things at the things that we know are both needed and where the courses that we have that we've got will actually deliver the people that the employers want, as well as obviously changing the lives of those people who are going through the course. That's really important. So So devolution of skills, full devolution of skills, and a long-term settlement would be really good. You know, obviously one of the things we're asking for is a single settlement of the entire budget from central government to enable us to again focus on the things that are local priorities.
On skills, do you think LSIPs have worked?
I think LSIPs are working. So we've got adult skills. So again, this is a fragmentation. So we have the 16 to 19 bit is delegated to us. We don't have that's not right. The 19 plus bit is delegated to us. So the adult skills is delegated to us. The 16, 19 is not. And we have very little say over that. So we've got colleges that we work with where we represent a part of their income but not the other bit. We also don't have responsibility over apprenticeships, and we have no engagement with higher education. We have no responsibility for higher education. So we are providing a convening platform, and in our growth plan, which I will leave a copy with you, we talk about setting up an inclusive talent strategy for London, which we're engaging in consulting on at the moment. Looking at the whole thing in the round, including the things that we don't have responsibility for, but the more engagement we have with those other parts of the education system, the more we'd be able to coordinate better and deliver what our employers need.
Yeah.
I just want to nail this, Howard. So basically, post-16 education and training spending, you think should be devolved?
Ideally, yes. Or if not, what we'd like is more say over it so that we can coordinate better with the adult skills.
I'll just say yes. Yeah, I don't know why we don't do that. I think, I suppose to address the question, you know, a lot of this is about giving people in their local areas agency over what it is that they want to see, and that is about kind of access to that training, to the jobs, access to the right level of public transport and infrastructure. And in order to drive that, we need more investment in more parts of the country. We all know that. But on the skills specific question, because it's a really good one, businesses will say to us, you know, we've got skill shortages in these places. You can't drive that from Westminster. You need to be able to drive it locally, and you need a system that's properly joined up. And what we've got at the moment, as we know, is too many people who are not in work or education, who are in that 16 to 19 bracket. We've got economic inactivity in young people, which is not at a sustainable level, and that will absolutely affect our ability to grow as a country. And so what we have now is an education system that separates post-19 and post-16 to 19, and you've got people falling through the gaps. If you don't want, and you know, Andy would talk about his MBAC, but if you don't want to do a traditional route, so if you don't want to go to school and then do your A-levels and then go to university, I think at the minute it is too difficult to forge your own path. If you miss the opportunity for an apprenticeship, we can't pick you up again until you're 19.
And you think devolution skills funding would allow you to fix that? It
would allow us to pick up skills, so not traditional education A levels, but skills from 16 and join that system up right through into adulthood, making sure that it's directly responsive to employers, directly responsive to the needs and the wants of residents, and in keeping with our regional growth plans. It just makes more sense, and we also have that kind of delivery already. I think Howard's point as well on single settlements, absolutely crucial for us to be able to respond properly to the needs of a region without, frankly, having 73 different funded.
Yep.
73 is not an exact
It sounds
number.
like the Total Place programme introduced by a pioneering Chief Secretary of the Treasury some years ago. George Freeman, briefly.
Thank you, Chair. I should declare I also agree, having done 30 years in this space, to me the decentralisation of skills is key. So my questions are to you both. In your cluster, the ecosystem place, have you looked at the pace of new jobs, the pace of creation of new jobs coming over the next, say, 5-10 years? And second question, has DFE and the local skills unit plugged in with you to ask the same question and take your answer? And I ask because in all the clusters I went to over the last 10 years, I found that those place-based leaders normally with their companies had a good sense of, yeah, we're going to create 50,000 jobs in green, we're going to create 10,000 jobs in big numbers, that when I turned to DFE, they didn't recognise them, and they were much more focused on very local implementation of DFE initiatives. So I just wonder whether you've done whether those observations ring true.
Yes, so
Kim, do you want to pick that up first? Yeah.
Yes, through the local growth plans, exactly that. So, for example, we know that we could create 24,000 jobs in green energy along the Tyne, and in order to do that, we'll need welders and painters, and we'll need all of the kind of green energy and offshore wind capacity and skills, and we'll create a green energy and engineering super academy in order to do that. I don't believe that conversation has been directly had with DFE about kind of what that means in terms of the join up between the skills and education and then through to how we might deliver that growth plan. But actually that is one of the things as mayors that we're really trying to drive, because we, by our very nature, run a very joined up organisation. The people in our organisation are thinking about job creation and skills and transport and housing, and they're thinking about it in a joined up place-based way, where government naturally works in departments and silos. And so, for us, when we drive into government, we're trying to do that with the people of our place in mind. What are the needs of our community? How do we deliver the growth plan? And what are the tools that we need to do it?
Tonya Bence.
Thank you, Chair. And so we're about to, Skills England is about to come into being. Are you appropriately represented in the governance of Skills England? And how does it need to work in order for you to deliver on the type of vision that you've set out? Howard first?
I'll just say I completely associate myself with Kim's comments. I'd also I'd give you another one, which is DWP, which also needs to be lined up, because obviously job centres are one of the vehicles for delivering engagement with employment services, career services, and at the moment we don't even currently have access to the DWP data. So if you asked us, how do your people coming through the
You can't actually do any labour market planning because you haven't got access to DWP data.
We can do labour market planning, absolutely, but we don't know whether it's been successful or not because we don't have access to DWP figures. So that's a conversation we're having. And I would say...
How long have you been having that conversation with DWP?
Yes, I would say that the ministers have been very forthcoming in terms of engaging at the start of the process of setting up Skills England, and we've had a lot of engagement over the last year in terms of the policy development process. So we do feel like we've been brought in at the right times. We could have had a little bit more, I think, but we do feel like we've had some engagement on the setting up of Skills England.
Okay. I'm going to come to the chair of the Housing and Local Government Committee in a moment, but Andy Burnham, welcome. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Chair. My
joining
apologies
us.
for being
Not at all. Let me just catch you up and put the questions to you which others have just answered. It sounds like it's quite difficult for government to hit its overall growth objectives without mayors. Manchester's been growing at 3.1% for the last decade. You've presented today pretty ambitious proposals for the Northern Arc. Give us your view about whether government can succeed in becoming the fastest growing economy in the G7 without mayors playing a bigger role.
Well, I think, Chair, it's rightly made the conclusion that it has to have mayors and a devolved arrangement across the country to get the growth. That's a prerequisite, I would say. If you look at the Greater Manchester journey, and you and I were in Parliament in 2015 when the coalition government at the time signed that big first devolution deal with Greater Manchester, so a couple of years before I came in, that's when the change started. You can really see it in the data. And having been in the Treasury today, I just checked with them. No one disputes the data now. It's accepted that there is a real growth story that has been happening for 10 years in Greater Manchester and could go even further in the next decade. And our argument is, we are ready. We've got, I can say more about the Northern Arc and the plans we have in place to go further, deeper in the next decade. But we absolutely believe that will then help Kim. It will help Tracy, Oliver, Steve. As the growth, always the idea of the Northern Powerhouse was that you cluster these northern city regions and the agglomeration impact of that brings through growth. And I think the evidence is in. That's exactly what it will do, because everywhere is beginning to show the same growth. It's a question of now accelerating it.
And what have been the biggest frustrations during your tenure as mayor around the powers or the resources that you haven't felt that you needed to have?
I heard the discussion about DWP, and we work closely and well with them, but the data point Howard was making, it's just a madness that data is held in silos. We've got to get our heads as a country into place-based, bottom-up delivery, and that's what the combined authority model does. We've stumbled upon this model, but it is actually the right model. The devolution of the government I was in and you were in wasn't actually the right model, that layer across a region. It's much better to work through the local government base. I think we have got the right model. The evidence is very clear that it delivers the growth. The frustration, to answer your question, the biggest is the Department for Education, without a shadow of a doubt. And I'm not just speaking alone here with a sort of pet grievance of my own. I think all the mayors feel this. Why are we remaking the case for devolution to this department now? I've been doing it for 8 years. It stands to reason, Chair, that you can create stronger technical education pathways when you can work with the actual employers in your city region who will be employing the young people or the older workers who will come through. We are the only ones that can create those meaningful pathways. We are the only ones that could commission our colleges for the actual sectoral strengths of our economy. And yet, it still seems that is resisted. I think the kind of position of the Department for Education on this issue risks becoming an anti-growth policy. It risks pulling back the growth that we've got. I've done a lot on this. I've created a thing called the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, which I describe as an equal alternative to the university route. And as part of that, I've been working hard to get those T-level placements in, because we believe they are a real game changer that the last government brought in. The 45-day work placement linked to a T-level really changes the way the young people see those opportunities. More than 50% of young people work for those employers having taken those placements. And we believe if you really go with that model, we are the only ones who can do it because we know our employers. I'm convening our employers to get those work placements, to really create those extra pathways for our young people. And to feel even now that we're still having to argue for that and get permission to do that just seems to me to be we're wasting time here.
I was expecting...
Not the committee, we're wasting time with the...
I was expecting you to say Treasury as the biggest blocker, but actually having the Department for Education listed is very helpful. Florence.
Good afternoon. I'm Gatecrashing today from the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. And just listening to you there, I'll think about my time. I've served as a councillor, I've served as an assembly member now here. All governments of all political parties have talked a good game on devolution. But when it comes down to it, I think some of that power is still retained locally. In the English devolution white paper launched on the 16th of December, I think it was right that the government had a really ambitious area of devolving some of those real areas, including strategic powers. Just in your view, do you feel that the white paper goes far enough in terms of helping with that growth agenda? And what areas do you think that there's a glaring omission in there?
Andy,
I'll come back to education actually, because to me this is the area that is still, if I look at the Greater Manchester devolution deal, it's like a jigsaw that's been filled in to a considerable degree, but there's still a big missing piece there, and it's all age actually, and that's where it leans into the DWP agenda. We want an all age technical education system that's employer led. As part of this, I've created a tool called Beeline where a young person can go on our sectoral gateways. We identified 7 sectoral gateways into the GM economy. These are our strengths, Chair. We know the good jobs are here. If you go on that tool today and you click on digital and tech, and then you look at, kids are able to explore the jobs that we've got in our economy so they can see the jobs so that they can begin to think about could they do those jobs. Software developer is on that kind of, it comes up. If you click on that today, and it's an open system, you'll find about 450 vacancies for software developers in Greater Manchester. And here's the real issue. That becomes a risk to growth. Yeah. And this is what I would really want to get over to the committee. If we can't bring the talent through to meet those opportunities, that's a problem. Now, the reality of Greater Manchester today is the kids can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom window, but they can't, and it's probably true with London to a degree, they can't see a path for themselves to those places, and they can't see those jobs, feel those jobs, and start to say, right, I could get those jobs. The risk then is, if we carry on as we are with an approach to this that's, very top down and isn't connected to our employers and employer driven, is it a surprise that we've got almost 1 million young people who are not in education, employment or training as a country? Clearly something different is needed. And I don't want to make this just a big moan about the Department for Education. They have moved a bit, to be honest, down this path with us, and there are some encouraging noises. And Skills England, I think, could be a good innovation here if it's created in the right way and it's an enabling organisation for what we're trying to do. But I just want to leave the committee in no doubt. The reason there's urgency in my voice is we're growing fast, but we could quickly have a vacancy problem that turns investors away. Yep. And that's why it's mission critical for this government.
It was very striking when we were touring the country at the end of last year. Workforce was the number one issue for businesses, an even bigger issue than industrial energy costs.
Absolutely.
But Kim, what's your view on closed
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with everything there about education, and I won't repeat any of it. That devolution of it is critical for growth, and I think we've heard that loud and clear. I think on devolution, the white paper, I think we would say that it's a really good starting point. Mm-hmm. So in context, we're in a position now where we've got a very pro-devolution government, and in a very short space of time, we're starting to change the way the country's run and moving power closer to people, but there's still a long way to go. So I think we would consider it a really good starting point, but with some really clear ambitions that we have as mayors in the future. And some of those would be around housing and the ability to drive more social housing in particular in our region. We've already talked about skills. I think innovation, I think both Gregor and George were both on Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee, which I was present at a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the devolution of more innovation funding. And other levers that help us to tackle some of the social issues that are barriers to growth. So, for example, we're doing an awful lot in our region on child poverty. The reason that we're doing that is because it's disgusting that any children in this day and age should grow up in poverty. And those interventions, as far as I'm concerned, are absolutely economic. They are about securing the long-term future of a workforce and making sure that those kids have got access to the opportunity that they deserve. But in order to do that, we have to kind of weave and duck around the powers that we've got. And then finally, and this is something that mayors are universally agreed on, but is a big step for us. We need to get some fiscal devolution powers, and we need to move devolution into that space quickly. And we have suggested.
Spell that out for us, Kim. Just
well,
what's
we've
entailed
suggested,
in that.
for example, a tourism tax and the ability to levy hotel rooms and overnight stays, so that we can then recycle that money into our regional economies. We know that that's new money into our local economies. We know that it is a pro-growth. We know it's a pro-growth policy. We know that it will work, and we know that there is resistance to doing that at the moment. So we're having positive conversations. I feel like we're getting there. So it's a really good start, but there's a long way to go, and we know that these are things that will absolutely help us get growth in the regions.
Howard, what's the London perspective?
Yeah, so I associate myself with those comments, and I would say, and Andy's absolutely right, and we support the Northern Arc programme and the principle there, because that's going to help the whole of the country, including London, because we are not in competition with Manchester, we're not in competition with the other regions. Our competitors are places like New York, and I'll give you an example. In New York, the mayor spends about 50% of the tax that's raised in the city. Now, he does have additional responsibilities. So he's got responsibility for things that the mayor of London doesn't have, but it's 50% is under the control of the mayor, and that gives him enormous room for manoeuvre. In Tokyo, 70% of the money is spent by the mayor. So only 30% goes to the national government level. So very, very strong regional government. In London, it's 7%. And that's not just Sir Sadiq, the mayor of London, but it's the boroughs as well. So between the boroughs and the mayor, it's 7%. So 93% of the tax raised in London goes to a national level. So we can't, for example, designate an area a low tax zone in order to promote people to move into that area in the way that New York or Paris can. We can't designate somewhere a high tax zone if there's a place that's doing really well and we want to generate some benefit for Londoners from that. We can't borrow against things like VAT in the way that they can across America, which is how they fund a lot of tax incremental financing projects in the States. We don't have full control of additional business rates in the way that Andy does, but that all regions should have. So there's a lot of, in an international context, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back, really. We just don't have the levers or the money, even though the money's there. So it's not that there isn't investment and money flowing through London. It's just that we aren't able to capture it in the way that other cities around the world are.
Antonia Batts.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we've had a number of local strategies and plans over the years, local industrial strategies for the past. How do we think local growth plans will avoid the same problems that these plans have had in the past?
And this might be a moment, Andy, just to tell us a little bit more about Northern Arc.
Yeah.
As part of your answer tonight.
Shall we start with Andy then?
I will. What I've learned leaving this place and taking up the role that I do now is the local approach doesn't change. GM's never changed. Greater Manchester's had its plan, and it goes back a long time. They've been working together for a long time, and were very fixed on what they wanted and what needed to be done. The buses were a thing, going back to the early when I was an MP in here, I'd be lobbied by Greater Manchester incessantly about can we get the power to regulate, and it took too long. But so Greater Manchester has kind of known what it's wanted to do, and the way I'd describe it is kind of like the weather comes and goes in Westminster, but we kind of keep going. So the plan that Theresa May asked us to do, the local industrial strategy, remains our industrial strategy, and it will be the strategy that we hope will come through in the new industrial strategy. I think just to say something about that, I would encourage the committee to think about it not in one area as kind of pigeonholed as being about manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and another area is life sciences. See, we're all a mix of all of these things now, and it's quite layered. And and that's what our industrial strategy in 2017 said. And if anything, it's become more sophisticated now. So we kind of stick to the course. The interesting thing about the Northern Arc is, I think this is the third time the country has come back to this concept. John Prescott, Chair will remember, did the Northern Way in the 2000s. Then, of course, we had Northern Powerhouse in 2014 when George Osborne made that speech. The concept was the same. If you pull these big cities across the north together, and we connect up all the way up to Kim in the northeast and to Hull, new mayor coming through in Hull by the end of the week, that clustering is the right thing to do. And the evidence in the Northern Arc is, particularly the northwest element of this, where we are saying we need a new rail line to support the growth that we have in train along it, will actually deliver more in terms of GVA than the Oxcam arc. That is the clear evidence that we're presenting to Parliament today, alongside, I would say, a fairly stunning set of figures around growth, not just in Greater Manchester, but on the northwest end of the Northern Arc. We've all been growing faster than the UK economy, and for 45 of my 55 years on this planet, the north of England was not growing faster than the UK. It was growing slower than the UK, and all the social problems that fell out of that and the sense of unfairness across the country. Finally, we've turned it around, and you could argue it's the same plan that John Prescott put forward. It's the same plan that George Osborne put forward, with different tweaks here and there. The question is, why has the country never backed it? Why has the country never backed this plan? And I think it does go to structural things like the Green Book. Mm-hmm. We still have, you can't grow an economy because we're still giving out public investment according to who's the strong economy right now. Who's the one who's delivering more now. And I learned that as Chief Secretary, and I'm sure you did as well. That's a real frustration. You don't get that patient capital into areas, to grow areas that could be bigger. But I just think it's something as simple as, I don't think since the demise of big industry in this country, in the north and the Midlands, in let's say the 60s and the 70s, I think there's been a sense of the north couldn't be much anymore. It has to be in some form of managed decline. That's how it would feel to your part of the world and to us. And it's just not had the sort of, the kind of belief as a Whitehall system that the North can be something more. I think it's taken the mayors and the combined authorities to come along and say, no, we can be something more, and we'll prove to you we can be something more. We've built a public transport system pretty much ourselves, to be honest. We've had to fight for the support that we've had, but the B network is now there. That's our foundation for growth. The tram system was built almost in the teeth of opposition at times, from Westminster. That's where we find ourselves, and this idea is coming back for a third time, and it will deliver more growth according to the evidence. We're not positioning ourselves against Oxford and Cambridge. Greater Manchester Combined Authority has signed a collaboration agreement with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and this is the interesting thing with Howard as well. How do you start to get a more collaborative country where if Cambridge is doing the R of R&D, we help do the D, the spin-outs that we can locate on some of the land that we have. That becomes a coherent industrial strategy for the country, doesn't it, Howard and Kim? We all feel this, where you can draw the links between the different regions of England, and you can then start to sort of bring through that collaboration, and the growth in one area starts to lift another, and that's how it will be done. Third time lucky, Antonia, is what I would say. This idea has come back 3 times for a reason. The issue is now Whitehall. Are you backing this or are you not? Are you backing the north of England to succeed now or are you not? We've got the growth. We've built that growth. And it's a big decision for the country now as to whether or not it's going to actually do it. I have confidence, as Kim said, that this government will, and we'll see that in the spending review.
Kim, what's your view?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And where we are now is that we've got growth plans that don't just zone up the country into lists of sectors. And I think quite often that's what we would have seen from iterations past. But mayors leading growth plans that tell a story of a place and a story of a region, joining up those, as I've already said, housing, skills, infrastructure needs, the social issues and how we might solve them with the sectors where we do excel, and making sure that, crucially, not only does that get growth by joining up the businesses, being able to know when to bring government into that conversation, but actually delivering growth that people can feel, that changes their day-to-day experience of living in the place, helps them to feel like they have a bit of ownership and political agency over what's happening to them, rather than, everything being directed by a government in Westminster, which to too many of them just remains faceless, feeling like it belongs to them. And I think that point around collaboration, breaking down the competition, we should never be, as regions, in competition with each other. It is completely unnecessary.
But they make us bid too much.
We have to bid too much. We have to bid too often for small parts of one-off cash, or you're going into a spending review and you feel like you absolutely have to. I feel like I have to get in front of Treasury quicker than my colleagues, and that is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous way to do things when actually what our ambition is growth in all parts of the country. Those joined-up areas of collaboration. We'll be launching the Great North very shortly, looking at how we can get growth right across the north. Of course, the Northern Arc is part of that, as well as how we might drive investment, particularly in green energy, in culture, in the things that separate us as a north, and say that we can do this together in a way that perhaps we can't do it as a sum of our parts. We can't do it alone. And I think those growth plans are really key to that. And the final thing I would say, though, and Andy's made this point as well, but it is only any good if it drives national policy change. It is only any good if government looks at these growth plans, accepts that they are bottom up, they're driven by what our communities want and need and feel, the strengths in the regions and what will get growth, feeds them into an industrial strategy and says, right, that's how we direct investment, that's how we change policy in order to get that growth and capitalise on the opportunity that we've got kind of through the regions, provided by mayors, and delivered in such a way that the public feel the change and feel that it is for them.
Okay. Howard, briefly?
So we produced our growth plan. So Sadiq had this in the manifesto, which obviously he got re-elected along with other mayors before the government came in. It was already on the stocks. So half of this is stuff that we can do ourselves. It's the other half where we need the government to support us. And what we've been saying is let London be London. You know what London's capable of. And he's right that the Green Book often will say, money spent in London will give you more bang for the buck, and often that's true. But that doesn't mean that should be money that could have been spent in other parts of the country. It's money that's already in London that we'd like to get access to. Let us do what we know we can do by devolving some of the taxation that's already in London, already generated, by growth in London to support the growth that needs funding. So
I want to come on to the way in which industrial policy money is allocated, but let me bring in Matt Weston first.
Just very briefly, and Andy, nice to see you, but I haven't seen your Northern Arc proposals, but do you see the cohesion of the North being better delivered and through a better transport infrastructure between the cities of the North, rather than thinking we should have HS2 up to Manchester, for example? Do you think it's more important that you have connectivity across your Northern Arc, or you have connectivity between Manchester and London? It's not a trick question.
It's a question I've often been asked, and if pinned to the corner of this room and forced to choose, I would say the east-west connectivity across the north is awful. You know, if you're going to travel from Manchester to Leeds today, you're just looking at a disrupted train journey, or sitting in your car on the M62 as it goes past that farmhouse that's in the middle of the M62. You know, that's basically your choice. And we spend hours, don't we, when we're doing meetings across the north, just trying to get to our different...
It takes me longer to get to you than it does to get to here.
Well, exactly. And therefore... But why is that question always... This goes back to my theme of before, how the country treats the north. Always, that question is put to me because we're meant to choose. Well, you can't have everything, so which one are you having? North, south, or east, west? Now, with all respect, and we're patriotic people, we're proud of what's happened in the capital city, and and we support Sadiq and Howard in terms of what they're doing. But London was never forced to choose. Do you want north, south, or do you want east, west? You know, and I know that because I put together the funding package for the Elizabeth line, because London needed better east-west in the days gone by. So why is the north forced to choose? You know, we're currently facing a position, this is why the Northern Arc is so crucial to us, where we are the fastest growing city region in the UK outside of London by some margin. And yet, we have HS2 coming halfway up towards us, and those trains will trundle onto the West Coast Main Line on the current plan, and they will have to go slower than the Pendolinos because they won't be able to tilt. Right, that's number one. And then from the other angle, Trans-Pennine route upgrade will bring trains over the Pennines into city centre Manchester. My transport advisor, Vernon Everett, ex-TfL, says that that's like building a motorway into a car park. And that's the reality. And I think it is insulting to the people of the north of England to have been promised HS2, HS3 as it used to be called across the north, everything, all of those things, and here we are 10 years on, and none of it came through. I think it's got to be both. We need a plan for both. You cannot, if you leave the West Midlands trying to connect to the northwest of England via the M6 motorway in its current form and the West Coast Main Line in its current form, those are two anti-growth policies.
I think Midlands MPs on this committee would agree with that wholeheartedly. Let me bring Sarah Edwards on the money.
Thank you, Chair. So it's really important and interesting to hear from all of you as mayors. But I just thought, before I move on to the question, just around the fact that we've got quite a lot of constituencies that are not covered at all at the moment under devolution plans. Obviously, that's coming. But the time it might take to get there, I'm concerned that growth that we want to see is not necessarily going to spread as evenly as I think we would all like. And that's not a criticism of the work that you're doing. I think it is just a challenge in how, therefore, do we parcel up that funding that we know we want to get from government out into the regions where we haven't necessarily got the structures in some places to make the most of it. So Tamworth is a non-voting constituent of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So fantastically, I can work with Richard Parker on housing and skills, which is great, and we've had a good conversation about that. But if I turn to the industrial strategy now, and with your minds thinking about how you're going to deliver what you want to, how do you think that proportion of money should be split between that national pot of money and some of the strategic work that the government were doing and what you're going to be doing more locally? And perhaps, I don't know who to start start with? Should I start with Howard and move back towards Andy? Thank you.
So it's quite unclear how much money is earmarked for industrial strategy. It's quite difficult to find that out. But we're trying to get a sense of how much actually should the government invest in sectors directly, and how much actually would it make sense to just invest spatially through devolved settlements that are bigger.
Well, I think you have to do both, and I think that the spatial bit of the sectors, I think, is crucial. We have no say over R&D expenditure, for example. We have no say over tax credits. So there's a whole load of policy where I think more involvement from devolved administrations could make a real difference. I'm not challenging Andy on the Elizabeth line, but one of the reasons we did get the Elizabeth line across London was because we had a mayor. And it was actually...
No, I supported that.
Absolutely. No, and you were literally there at the time. Thank you. And very good.
I have to be careful who I admit that to in the north.
But it was right. It was the right thing to do, and we should have followed on immediately with rolling the Crossrail team onto HS2 and gone ahead and built it whilst the team was running hot. We're paying for it obviously because we got saddled with the whole of the cost of the overrun, which we got as a loan from the Treasury, which we're still paying back. Will be for another 10
industrial strategy fund.
10 years. Yeah. I think giving the mayors the power and the responsibility of delivering some of the sectoral work at a spatial level, I think, is crucial. And I think it makes real difference. It's back to the power infrastructure that you need for growing, particularly the high power need. Things like data centres, like AI, like life sciences, the skills which can only be delivered locally because it's the local people that are going to go into those jobs. The physical spaces which mayors can identify and can bring together, use CPO powers where necessary, bring land together to create the spaces where things can happen. Those can only be done at a local level, not from a top down from Whitehall.
Kim?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right, and we want to have more ability to invest in the spatial elements of the industrial strategy. So I used green energy and offshore wind clustering as a really good example of that. Channeling that through us would make a great amount of sense and would help to get growth. But of course, what we need to be able to do is to create that join up so that, of course, we're attracting inward investment, attracting, for example, innovative new startup businesses that are pioneering in these growth sectors, and local and combined authorities and mayors are best placed to do that. But I would argue that you kind of only asked half of the question, because what we're able to do is to look right across the piece. And so, for example, in our region, the culture and creative sector is really big in our growth plan. It is also really big in the National Industrial Strategy. Yes, we want to be able to use devolved money through the industrial strategy to develop that sector, but we also need to have more control over, for example, the Arts Council funding. Because if we start to treat some of these sectors that have been grant funded as grown-ups and say, actually we're going to fund you properly in the way that you should be and help you to develop and help you to grow as clusters of economic entities, then we'll change things. I think the same is true in a different way, for example, of Homes England. More devolution of Homes England's money and power will help us to get growth and will help us to channel the right investment in and around key housing sites, and we're best placed to locally determine that. So, of course, you're always going to need to have a place for that regional and national collaboration over major inward investments, major infrastructure investments and so on. But the more we can devolve into the regions as levers to pull to get that growth right across those sectors, the better.
Andy, you said it doesn't make as much sense as perhaps it did if you've got sectors that are intermingling in terms of their needs.
Yeah.
Presumably you'd argue that it makes more sense to devolve spatially than earmark most of the money for sectors.
I absolutely would say that, Chair, because I think overly doing this again nationally, the risk always, and I've been here with you before, we've discussed these issues over many years, you get quite a simplistic top-down approach to the industrial complexity of Britain. You have to start with the clusters. Where is the real world-class strength? If we're being honest, I know there's a degree of everything everywhere, and I know we all feel that, and I used to feel it as an MP, and I know that feeling. But I think you've got to be honest and say, and I think Mr. Freeman used to have very strong views about this, and I agree with him. You've got to go with where there's real clusters, but then work to maybe sort of how do they expand, how do they. So it is essentially, I would say, a bottom-up process. Yeah. It really isn't a top-down process. Where to give you some encouragement though, because I think you're asking the right question. We had a very strong life sciences strategy in Greater Manchester ourselves, and that came through in the Theresa May strategy of 2017. But predating that, we'd worked with our colleagues in Cheshire East over many years because of the AstraZeneca site at Alderley Edge. So we'd done, we had a cluster collaboration with them, and actually through the years we've been arguing with them for them to get a devolution settlement, and now it's coming through. They'll have a mayoral election next year.
How far could you go with this? I mean, is there a case for saying actually all of the industrial strategy money should be routed to devolved authorities?
My argument at this spending review, Chair, is increasingly one of saying the more you route through our, because we have an integrated settlement now with government. We have a block of funding, if you like. The silos have gone for Greater Manchester and West Midlands, and hopefully soon for others as well. Mm-hmm. The more it makes sense, because as Kim was saying, you cannot live in the silos of Whitehall when you're out in our world. You have to link R&D spending to regeneration. For us on the Oxford Road corridor, for instance, we've invested heavily down there in infrastructure, but it links to, the transport spending, the housing around it, as Kim's saying. Places are complex, and you have to sort of do place making, and the industry needs to sort of sit within that wider master plan for what you're trying to do. So I wouldn't say all, because I do think at times you need to build, you have to build national capability in sectors where we're behind. But I think where you can, I think devolution by default should be the principle.
Yeah.
Mindful of time, Chair. Just coming back to the SDS, obviously, we are saying there should be a national one. In terms of securing local agreement for a local spatial development plan, do you think there'll be problems in that, especially where we're talking about the money? Bearing in mind you've got the devolution going on, also local government reorganisation, where I know that some councillor colleagues on local government have some concerns.
Well, Florence, I think we're the only ones to have agreed a city region spatial plan, unless anyone can correct me on the panel. I think London has a...
We have our own, yeah.
You have a plan, don't you?
Plan,
it must be that it's an outside of London point I'm making then. Sorry to not get that right. 9 of our 10 got over the line in a plan called Places for Everyone. Stockport, sadly, we couldn't persuade to stay part of it. Political capital was expended for sure, but we can stand before you today with confidence about the GM 10-year pipeline as part of the Northern Arc, Old Trafford regeneration, which some of you may have heard about, but a big
much needed,
huge strategic site off the M60 called Atom Valley in Rochdale, Oldham and Bury, which will be an advanced materials, advanced manufacturing cluster. The reason we can do that is because of that plan. We've done it. We've allocated it. And hard as it was, it, in my view, was the right thing to do. But how many more areas, given the politics of the country, will be able to get regional spatial plans over the line? I honestly don't know. We wouldn't not do it again because we are passionate about Greater Manchester and its potential and where it's going, and we are now set up for this 10-year decade of growth because of it. But it's been politically challenging every step of the way.
Okay, slightly against this, but George Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're going to get in the finance and the R&D sessions onto the balance of vertical and place. While we've got the 3 place leaders, I wanted to ask about transport. It seems to me if we're going to do placemaking and build clusters, the connectivity is completely key. In my part of the world, East Anglia, we have 52 railway stations. 48 have got plants growing through the ceiling because they're thought of as waste land, not little business incubators. And I just wanted to ask whether, but I mean that's different from the southwest. Government's nationalising railways as a sign of privatisation, as it wasn't working. Is there an argument for a much bolder regional ownership of infrastructure of rail? I mean, my part of the world, I'd love an East Anglian railway company. The southwest could do it, but not all geographies work. Do you think there's an argument for really not nationalising into Whitehall or privatising out on the wrong structure, but regionalising and letting local leaders take the subsidy?
Absolutely no doubt whatsoever. I mean, it was actually, I was born in Andy's area. It was the buses being deregulated that brought me into politics in the first place. My mum voted for you, incidentally. But
I brought them back.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Absolutely no doubt at all. If you take, for example, the London Overground network compared to what was there before, there is no doubt whatsoever that is being run in a much better, more efficient, more profitable, better way for passengers, better way for the country than it was before. Absolutely no doubt. The more we've been able to extend TfL's operation of rail, of buses, of obviously the Elizabeth line, and then working with Network Rail and with national rail companies, the better it's been. There is no doubt at all that the regional level transport makes a huge difference, and that includes new railway lines. Three of our key projects that we've put into the spending review: the extension of the DLR to Thamesmead, the Bakerloo line extension, and the West London Orbital. These things that should have been done years ago. We're competing with countries around the world who are building 2 or 3 new tube lines across their capital city in a year. I should say heavily subsidised by national government in most cases. We get no subsidy from national government for TfL. But if we were able to capture the value of, say, the housing and the land and the extra taxation that's generated by those new railway lines, we could easily pay for them ourselves.
Okay, Gregor Poynton.
Great. One of the things that we've been really seized of with the industrial strategy or inquiry is about how does this actually work in practice. Some of the bodies that are either being created or being folded in to actually deliver this, and 2 that relate to you all is the Mayoral Council and the Council of Nations and Regions. 2 questions. Firstly, how confident are you that those mechanisms are in place in order to get that coordination and frankly deliver on the industrial strategy? And then the second part to that is the Green Paper said that they plan to work in lockstep with you all in terms of working through the sectors, the businesses that are engaging on that. Would you say that has happened to date?
In our case, yes. And there's been a long. We've worked with civil servants for a long time on the industrial strategy that predates this. We've been building it for a long time. So the evidence base for GM is really clear. In terms of those structural changes, just to say something about this, there's only been 1 meeting of the Council of Nations and Regions, although another one I think is coming soon. The Mayoral Council, not yet. I don't. I think I missed. I missed it. I think it was in the North East. I did it. I was on Zoom. I
belong together.
It was East-West connectivity is not what it needs to be. But
the point I just want to make about the Council of Nations Regions, it was in Edinburgh. It kind of brought to life what I was trying to say before: a more pragmatic UK. Where we were talking to the First Minister of Scotland, oh, you're doing that, and oh, yeah, maybe that we could collaborate with Northern Ireland on that. These were conversations that just the UK's never had amongst itself. It's always through the prism of Holyrood to Westminster to Cardiff and it's all the tension and the politics that comes with that. I get the feeling that if this council really comes through, it just will bring that pragmatic, place-to-place collaboration. And we'll start driving the industrial strategy outside of Westminster, to be honest. So we'll just start doing it together, and that will be the best thing that we could achieve. Here. Far be it from me to tiptoe into Scottish politics, but I observe as I look at Scotland in terms of the way it's gone since devolution, that power has actually been taken out of the cities of Scotland up to a national level, and it feels that they're a bit underpowered to me when I look at that at the moment. Police Scotland, Fire Scotland, it's kind of brand Scotland, but the cities, if there was an elected provost or mayor of Glasgow, Steve Rotherham and I, and this would be true for you, the elected mayor of the city region of Edinburgh, would be on the phone to them every couple of weeks, and it would just be a different dynamic, and it would be a much better dynamic, I think.
Can I just, do you think that the join, if there is a join proposed between the Industrial Strategy Council and this Council for Regions and Mayors, is in the right place yet? Is that clear enough to you? Do you think it's...
Possibly not, but I think we hosted the Industrial Strategy Council last week, and I think I'm really kind of excited by that grouping of people. I think they've really got a great take on all of this. I think they could play a really influential role. Some of the members of the council, Dame Nancy Rothwell, she, as Vice-Chancellor of Manchester University of Manchester, really drove our industrial strategy. I mean, George remembers that. So they've seen it and lived it and done it. And there are many more on the council that I think have got So I think it's when you bring those two pieces of infrastructure together, because I believe it's going to be a standing council, the Industrial Strategy Council, put that behind the Council of Nations and Regions, and then really then sort of into a delivery mode. I think that would be tremendously exciting.
I think mayors met with the Industrial Strategy Council and had a really productive conversation about what regional growth looks like. And interestingly, to loop us back, that post-16 skills conversation was pretty massive. And you can see that kind of sitting in between an industrial strategy and regional growth plans, they can look and see, that is one of the key drivers for growth. And I think bringing together mayors and nations to harness that cross-border working is crucial. For us, we should be looking north so much more. Yeah. But the system's always compelled us to look to Westminster. Yeah. Yeah. We need to look north a lot more. We need to look probably, to our key friends in Glasgow, Northern Ireland as well, because of kind of the industrial crossover that we have. And that is hopefully what will come out of the Council of Regions and Nations. I think we all felt like it was very much a big move. And I think it's important to remember that until that point, that meeting had never happened at all, even informally. And I don't think until even after the last election, the whole grouping of mayors and the Prime Minister had sat together before. Yeah. And it shouldn't be like that, but that's where we started. So it's only for us. Can I be cheeky and answer a little bit of the last question about trains as well? Of course, we really think more regional control of trains is massive. We would really like to control elements of Northern in our region, working with the Tees Valley in North Yorkshire to do that. We know that we could deliver that service better. We know we could integrate it with our metro and with our wider services in the way that Andy has done with the B network. But I would go a step further and say, not only that, devolve those train stations, because we would treat them as incubators. They are absolutely huge assets. They are gateways to our regions.
Development sites.
And then Network Rail have got an absolute ton of land. Yeah. So much land that at the moment we have to access. We have to access that commercially.
It's as simple as this,
it's just
Kim.
Transfer
Network
it.
Rail see them as liabilities.
Yeah.
We would see them as assets.
Yeah.
And we're bringing, just very quickly, 8. Our plan at this spending review is to bring 8 northern lines into the B network. Yeah. So that will be our TfL overground equivalent. So that will mean we have the cap is in place now on tram and bus in Greater Manchester. We have a tap-in, tap-out system over tram and bus. 8 lines coming in, but the places on the 64 stations on those 8 lines in Greater Manchester, and some of them are outside our borders, back to Sarah's point, so Glossop and Buxton. So you can the benefits of the city region start to spread. They become more attractive places to invest immediately when they are inside the B network cap. And then you get the residential development around, because there's spare land around these stations. And we are asking for that land to be transferred at this spending review to us at no cost, so we can regenerate, we can build the residential stuff around it, but then capture some of the planning gain to take the weeds growing in the roof and give them full disability access. That would be something, wouldn't it, to have train stations that many of our fellow citizens can access.
Tim, you finish.
Yeah, no, I think that it's absolutely that transfer the land. It is bonkers in this world that we would commercially buy that land. It is inside the public sector. It's there as development land. It sits alongside major national infrastructure, and it would help us to get growth. And so when we're devolving railways, we should be thinking about the whole picture.
Brilliant. That takes us out of time. That has been ambitious, clear, punchy, and I think what has emerged is a manifesto, Andy, in your words, for a more pragmatic United Kingdom. That's been a brilliant session. That concludes this panel. Order.
Colleagues.
Thank you.
Order. Welcome to the second panel of today's hearings for the Business and Trade Select Committee as we pursue our inquiry into industrial policy in the United Kingdom. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got a brilliant panel now convened to look at the role of our finance institutions and how our finance institutions can help the government fulfil the ambitions in its industrial strategy. John Godfrey, perhaps I could start with you. Can you tell me, do you think that the UK currently has the right finance institutions to help the government fulfil its industrial policy ambitions?
Well, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. We certainly have a world-leading range of financial institutions, and I'm talking here mainly about the private sector institutions in the city and well beyond the city, and we have world-leading organisations in the banking space, in the insurance space, in the asset management space, and in adjacent sectors as well, all supported by very strong financial and professional services, so the accountants, the consultants, the lawyers. So that is a very great strength that we have, and I should add that of the 2.4 million people who work in the sector, 2/3 of them are working outside London. So it's a resource which is spread to some degree across most of the parts of the country. And those are not, by the way, simply back office jobs. They are serious economic contributors in their own right. So I believe we do. And in a sense, the important point to make around this is that we also have very significant pools of capital that can be deployed in support of the industrial strategy. We want as a sector to support the industrial strategy. For example, £2.6 trillion worth of pensions, plus there is annuity funds, plus there is a substantial amount of dry powder in private equity, etc., etc. So the firepower exists. What we need is to develop the right mechanisms to deploy that in support of the industrial strategy.
And what are the mechanisms that are missing? And you've written about this before.
I have indeed written about this, and you've seen some of that work. My experience, certainly, and the experience of most people I talk to in the sector, is that for all the willingness to deploy funds, it is hard to find the right investable opportunities that are described and presented to investors in a way which investors will understand. There are multiple ideas, multiple cities and regions trying to promote their investability and making their case for an economic investment to go there. But if you sit down and say, I'm an asset manager, I've got £500 million I want to put to work in the northwest, the northeast, the Midlands, wherever it may be. Can you please tell me what are the 5 things I could invest in? And this, by the way, is what my balance sheet needs. And the balance sheets are different, of course, between banks, insurers, asset managers, pension funds, and so on. So it's very hard to find really good professional and compelling prospectuses. That I think, is a gap.
Okay.
Many people.
Sorry, go on. You finish.
So many people have thought about trying to close this gap. Nobody has done it quite yet.
Okay, Kitty Ussher, what's your view? Perhaps we have the right pools of capital, we have the right people in place. Do you think we have the right institutions, or as John puts it, the right mechanisms to help match the capital that is available to deliver the government's industrial policy ambitions in the future?
Thank you, and also thanks very much for having me along today. By way of background, I head up a team within Barclays Bank that does public policy thought leadership research. So we use the data and expertise available to us as comes from our place in the market in order to provide some insight on exactly the type of questions that you're raising today. I think I'd say 2 things in particular. First of all, in order to realise the ambition of the forthcoming industrial policy, most of the investment is going to come from the private sector, and it's really important to appreciate that fundamentally this comes from the decisions of individual companies as to whether to press go on their own growth plans, because that's a necessary and prior condition to the finance then being available. And we know that private sector investment, unfortunately, appears to have plateaued in the best part of the last 10 years or so. So I'm going to make a point about institutions, but first of all, just to sort of get the context of this for the committee. We did some work last year that looked at what were the drivers of investment for the businesses seeking the finance. And we found that there's three main drivers, and I won't go into the detail, but the important point is that one of the drivers is what we call a foundational driver, which is their perception of the role of public policy and the macroeconomic environment being appropriate to do something a little more risky now as opposed to pausing. And doing it later mañana. So in terms of an industrial policy, when the government comes to publish, we think it's really important that they track this, because the good news is it's free, actually, to create a climate where people feel that they are certain that now's a good time to invest. So, something like a very simple question we asked a cross-section of all British businesses, do you feel that public policy gives you a certain environment into which to invest now? Good news is roughly half the business population, certainly towards the end of last year, thought that net it did, but there was still 20-something%, and it varies slightly depending on what's going on, who thought actually public policy detracted from their ability to make a decision to invest now. And so, if the government was to actually be able to calibrate that by sector, by region, and so on, then we get a real sense of what the priorities should be. And then, if you permit me, just one small point on the institutional architecture. Both the British Business Bank and the National Wealth Fund are really important partners to us, and I think it's very exciting what they're able to do. If you look at it from the point of a growth business that perhaps understandably is an entrepreneur rather than an expert in governmental and public sort of architecture, it can feel that fragmentation is sometimes a deterrent. So we did another piece of work on what it felt like to be an ambitious climate technology company, which is obviously crucial to meeting our net zero ambitions. And we found a lot of support for what's currently in place, but maybe not as large amount of awareness of it. And so if you're looking at it from their point of view, then you've got British Business Bank, National Wealth Fund, Innovate UK, you've got UKEF and a multitude and a plethora.
We've tried to draw a picture of it today and it defeated us.
Okay, well, you're the experts, Mr. Chairman, and so if you're an entrepreneur working in the private sector, it would perhaps be even more confusing. So I do think that particularly the BBB is trying to bring this together, but I think that's a very important point around fragmentation. Yeah. And it's not just because it's sort of confusing to get your head round, which is relevant, but also because you may find that expertise sort of falls through the cracks. So for the climate technology sector, for example, there's they're sort of quite investable propositions in that they're exciting and technology driven, but unlike a fintech, for example, there's a very large capex expenditure quite early on in the growth cycle, and when there's a sort of missing middle between a ticket size up to 10 million, which the British Business Bank typically does, and I'll be very interested, I'm conscious who's on the panel with me, and the 25 million that's normal starting point for the National Wealth Fund, you can find that some of these growth companies get sort of dropped in between and maybe are looking to both institutions for the expertise and not finding it.
But I think what you're saying then is that we do have we do have some things that are missing. It may be simplicity, it may be confidence, but it feels like we do have some things missing if we're to match the capital that we've got available to the ambitions that we've got for the future.
Yeah, yes, while recognising how important the current institutions are. Yes, I would say that.
Okay, thank you. Louis Taylor, what's your view? Do we have the right institutions, the right mechanisms to fulfil the industrial policy ambitions, or do some things need to change?
So I think that I agree with a lot of what the previous witnesses have just said. I think in terms of consistency of public policy, the British Business Bank is now 10 years old, and actually the range of programmes we've got have been consistently pursued, and we've built them up to a scale where we're now at a point where we want to sort of simplify and streamline it all, but we're very, very clear about what we can do. We're able to catalyse private money into the lending to small businesses and investing in small businesses. And we should always be doing that in a catalytic way, which comes back to John's point about the private sector institutions that are so strong. So I would argue that the agenda we're pursuing is pretty cross-political. Everybody wants more startups and scale-ups and backing more innovation, and they want more addressing of the regional disparity of equity provision, and that has been pretty consistent. In terms of going forward, Kitty has highlighted one area where there is potentially a gap. Whether that's all a gap that government should fill or whether it's a private sector gap as much as a government gap, well, I would argue that it is as much a private sector gap. I think that during the course of the spending review, we are proposing to the government an opportunity to address that gap. It's up to them to choose it. But John and I would not...
What does that look like? What is that proposition?
Well, that's a proposition to say that the British Business Bank invests in companies often several stages, seed, Series A, B, and then C. But as Kitty says, the largest cheque we will write tends to be around £15 million. We'd like to write the next cheque because we know this company, we've done our due diligence on it, we've done the difficult work, and writing a bigger cheque rather than a smaller cheque is the less difficult thing to do than to set up a new capability to look at whether to write that cheque at all.
What's the biggest cheque you would like to be able to write?
£50 million feels right into a round size of a couple of £100 million.
Okay. Mr. Flint, what's your view on whether we have the right mechanisms or institutions to fulfil the industrial policy ambitions the government set out?
I think the private sector, as has already been indicated, will do most of the heavy lifting, and we do have the privilege of hosting the world's financial capital. So all of the smart money is here, and we do reap the benefits of the ingenuity and creativity of private sector finance. So, and the fact that an industrial strategy is going to be articulated is going to be hugely helpful. If that clarity is exactly what the private sector financial system craves. With respect to the tools in the public sector toolkit, it's pretty comprehensive. And we can look at the gap between 15 and 25 and worry about it. Louis said, actually, I think the private sector will end up filling most of it, and maybe that gap, whilst it is real in an intellectual sense, I'm not sure how substantive it is. We've got a range of public finance institutions, the British Business Bank, National Wealth Fund, the UK Export Finance, BII, Homes England, Great British Energy is going to be setting itself up. But in addition to that, we provide enormous amounts of support for businesses through departments, business model design, revenue support mechanisms, CFDs, RABs, etc. So the toolkit, I think, is very comprehensive. And I've been on this side of the table, on the public sector side, for 4 years. I don't think there's much missing. I think it's all there, and I think in the main it's all there. And with a clear industrial strategy, we don't have any excuses, I don't think.
Okay, so you're not worried that finance or the lack of finance will be the inhibitor on government achieving its industrial strategy ambitions?
There is one particular issue that does exercise my mind. So all of the pools of capital are available. The difficult debate is who's taking the risk and who's getting the reward. Okay, it's not about pools of capital or notional amounts now. It's the risk sharing piece. There's lots of labels for, lots of jargon and labels for this, blended finance, etc. But what we need to be clear about is if we need to get a project over the line, if we need to develop a new industry or a new technology, who's taking the risk at what stage, where are the rewards going? And that is the eternal question for this challenge, and it's intellectually very stimulating. If we struggle, it will be because we're not able together, between the public sector and the private sector, to have a really good, honest, robust conversation about how we do that. And I'm really most of my career has been on the private sector side. I'm very mindful of the fiscal realities that this government faces.
Yep.
We need to get the private sector to take a little bit more risk with us.
Okay, Lola?
So, thank you, Chair. So, I'm actually guesting from the Treasury Select Committee where we talk non-stop about this risk versus stability point. And that was my top question to you, actually, Mr. Flint, was what is your boundary? So, as the National Wealth Fund is growing and you're getting an expanded mandate to align with the industrial strategy. What is the risk versus return for taxpayer appetite in your organisation?
Yeah, thank you. This is a really important question. So we have one shareholder, HM Treasury. By design, they have told us what our risk appetite is. So we have a notional capacity, £27.8 billion. And within that, we can take pretty much whatever risks we want as long as we stay within an economic capital risk budget of £7 billion. And this is a standard, tried and tested methodology that the banking systems use, that the regulated banking system has kind of developed and perfected over time. Ratio of 7 to 28, for rounding purposes, is key. What that means in practice...
Who made that up, that ratio? Where's it come from?
It came from Treasury. In our incarnation as the infrastructure bank, it was a slightly lower ratio.
Yeah. And is it the right ratio?
Yes. I mean, it's the right ratio.
Don't seem sure, Mr. Flint.
The shareholder decides how much risk they want us to take. And the way to kind of contextualise the decision they've taken is, pound for pound, we will take about 4 times as much risk as the UK commercial banks, and roughly twice as much risk as the EIB, which is an organisation that others like to compare us to. Now, as I said, that's not us claiming to be brave or anything like that. That was a policy design decision. We want you to use £27.8 billion of notional, but we'd like you to consume this amount of risk capital alongside it.
Is it good enough as a ratio, do you think? These things are hard to pin down to perfection, but I mean, is that a good enough ratio?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is. You know, we are not regulated, but we are subject to the principles of good regulation. And of course, we've got our shareholder has access to the PRA if they want to kind of sanity check any of this. But yeah, I think it's a reasonably simple but pragmatic and accurate enough way to signal to the market our risk appetite is different to the markets. And that's the key point. There'd be no point setting up a new ALB to have the same risk appetite. We have a different risk appetite by design, and we're making use of it.
So it's just the only reason I'm smiling is because they were the questions that I'd preempted. I wanted to ask you about your regulatory framework, because obviously you're not regulated, whether you'd mirrored it, but we'll leave that because you've talked about that. On the risk appetite then, can you give us some examples of what you've already started to invest in that is in order to de-risk some sectors that you're taking risk in that haven't been attractive to private sector investors?
Sure. So let's take long duration energy storage. So as we get to a renewables grid, we need lots of short duration energy storage. Traditional lithium batteries will do most of that heavy lifting, but we need longer duration energy storage. And there are some new technologies there that we need to develop at scale to be able to support a renewables grid. There's a company that's developed a liquid air energy storage technology, which in physics terms is quite simple. You use surplus wind to compress air into a cold and liquid state, store it, and then when you want the energy back, you kind of pull the pin and let it drive, let the decompression drive a turbine to generate electrons. This has been proven at a demonstration scale, but not yet in a commercial sense. We financed, along with Centrica, an industrial partner, the first commercial application of this for a plant that will be developed near Manchester. Now, when the private sector look at this, they love the technology, they love the idea, they'd be quite excited at the prospect of scaling this. But that first factory, the first plant rather than the factory, the first plant where we'll be demonstrating that we can commercialise this, that this can generate the revenues planned, the private sector's risk appetite does not extend that far. So we've done most of that financing.
It's a very interesting example. And we heard obviously from the mayors on the previous panel, I don't know if you were all in the room for it, but about the layering of the industrial strategy key sectors, the 8 key sectors, and how, because they're what term mega mayors, they're in line for the full devolution packages. They would like to have a sectoral strategy for each one of the industrial strategy sectors. How does that align with the work of the British Business Bank and of the National Wealth Fund in terms of geography? Because they claimed that they didn't want to be in competition with each other, but I cannot fathom a scenario where they're not competing for some of these investments. So how does it play out in real terms?
I'll answer on behalf of National Wealth Fund and then I'll pass to Louis. So to date, most of our work, candidly, has been sector-based. And that's partly through our life as the infrastructure bank before becoming the National Wealth Fund, and partly because we did have a net zero strategy that we could anchor all our work around. Helpfully, the net zero strategy does provide a lot of regeneration and jobs opportunities in exactly the areas that the country needs. The place-based lens that we have will need to mature and develop from here. We have a local authority advisory and lending business, which is the principal lens. And the Chancellor has asked us to develop strategic partnerships with Manchester, with West Midlands, with West Yorkshire and with Glasgow. And I suspect in her mind that's, I'm guessing a bit, but I think that's a pilot for what might follow. So I think that we will have to develop and dial up our place-based approach to this. But to date, the sectoral, in the early years, the sectoral approach has kept us more than busy.
Let me just bring in Matt Weston on this point because...
Can I just come? It's just really actually on more on the previous point you're making, Mr. Flint, and that was about you saying private sector being less interested. You've given that example of liquid air. Sounds fantastic, sort of aware of that kind of thing. But the private sector is not interested in the longer term in terms of the return that they were going to make, I think is what you were saying, isn't it?
No, it was about risk appetite. So they weren't prepared to take the risk at this stage in the development of that technology. It was too risky.
Okay, so it was simply the risk. And, okay, I thought it was also the duration of payback.
That can sometimes come into it. I mean, it's there's lots of different dimensions to a risk decision, but ultimately, the view of the market was, if this works, great, we'd love to finance it, but you have to prove to us it works first.
That's fine, thanks, Chair. George Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon all. I'm here guesting as Deputy Chair of the Science and Tech Select Committee, and I guess I should declare an interest. I advise various companies and funds, no specific conflict here. I just wanted to ask about the central question of access to finance, because it seems to me after 30-year career, 15 in the private sector, 15 in government, there are many things we haven't got quite right, but the big one that shines out is for a country with such phenomenal science, research, technology, innovation, excellence, with the City of London, a global financial hub, we've seen the allocation of our own pension money over the last 25 years go from sort of 50% into the UK to 5%. And we see some of our best startups being bought out by foreign companies because of a lack of scale-up capital. Now, there are lots of arguments why we might not have been ready until now. But my question is, how are we going to move the dial? There seems to be a lot of interest in Mansion House. As I've spent time in the city, everyone I've spoken to there has said, you need to mandate it. You need to say to us, because otherwise there's plenty of global opportunities where we'll get bigger returns. So could I ask you each for your observations on...
John Godfrey, do you want to start with that?
How we do it?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, the first point, I think, is that this differs a little bit. How do you make this happen differs a little bit in terms of which sector you're talking about. I mean, access to finance for life science may have different drivers from, for example, access to finance in the defence space, which is another one of the 8 growth sectors. So there are slight variations, but to the broader point and about motivating and directing, inspiring pension money to find its way across into UK companies, the first thing is in the defined contribution space, pension reforms and the move towards some consolidation, which is part of the government's agenda, should help. There is a further deregulation or proportionate regulation approach, which should again help. This is to regulate for growth as opposed to regulating for risk. If we can allow the pension funds to take a little bit more risk in that sense, particularly in DC and particularly where it relates to younger savers who should be more in equities, then that is all going to be helpful. Specifically on mandation, I think quite a lot of caution is required around that because of the fiduciary duty of the investment manager, and the investment manager will always turn around and say, at the end of the day, this is not my money, this is other people's money that I'm managing, and if you oblige me to go down this particular route, then I'm not in control of my own fiduciary duty. So some caution. There are, of course, ways you can push a sort of softer mandation. Greater transparency should help, and there are potential comply or explain type routes. But ultimately, the hard stop mandation is not something that I think the pension industry would welcome very much. And I don't know if it would help.
Thank you, Chair. And just to pick up on that point, so we've got about £70 billion that's given in the UK in tax relief for pensions, and just building on my colleague's point there, if we've got 70% of DC funds investing overseas and we've only got 2% of DB schemes investing in the UK, how do you think, picking up on your point earlier about the prospectuses, how can we better direct that investment and not, I think, impact that fiduciary duty that trustees have that responsibility to? What are your thoughts perhaps around that?
I mean, my point earlier really about prospectuses was only in part about identifying equity investments and business startups and scale-ups and so forth, but in part also about, look, how do we get into the regeneration of towns and cities and places. So it doesn't all have to be equity. There is a role here for fixed income. There is a role here for example, investment in real assets and property. And those things can work very well also for pension schemes. The thing that drives, one of the things that drives the reduction or has driven the reduction of investment into UK equity by pension funds is that a lot of them are tracking global indices, and something like an MSCI index will allocate 3.5–4% of a global basket to the UK, and so they will track that index. I think if we take a sort of slightly more holistic view beyond equity and looking at what can we do to help rebuild Birmingham or Manchester or Leeds or wherever from a pension fund perspective, then you can get quite a lot more done in terms of productive investment into the economy.
Lola?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up question to that point about pipeline investments and the security that these organisations that a lot of capital to invest are looking for, and the role of the National Wealth Fund in de-risking some of those opportunities. And I wanted to know, Mr. Godfrey, what is your view on the tension of the 7 billion versus the 28 billion risk appetite for the National Wealth Fund? Do you think they should have more risk available so that your investors can crowd in behind them?
Well, I'm not sure I'm best qualified to give you a number, which may or may not be different from the 7 and 28. I mean, I think as a matter of kind of principle, the important role, I think, for the NWF, and I'm sure John Flint would agree with me on this, the important thing is to leverage the maximum of private investment in alongside what you do. So this is not about competing where there isn't a market failure, or about crowding out by undercutting because you have a cheaper cost of funds and you can do that without having to carry the same capital base. This I think is about saying, is there a viability gap in a particular project or a particular place? A gap, not a chasm. No one's suggesting that your job is to fix the impossible. But where there is that gap, there is a clear role to come in and, for example, to fund part of the development phase of something, and then when the de-risking kicks in and you have occupancy and tenancy and all the rest of it, then you can pass that over to a different form of investor. There are other things which have been looked at and now back more into the sort of equity space. Around the LIFTS program, there was some serious consideration given to having co-investments which are not necessarily pari passus between the public sector and the private sector. So everybody gets a return, but the upside is more skewed to the private capital. So there are so many ways to basically go about doing this. But to go back to my very early point, Chairman, what all this leads me towards is the idea that there isn't enough shared skill and shared capacity across the investees and the investors to make this happen. And that's the gap that I think we need to somehow fill with almost something that fulfills a brokerage function, joining the money to the projects, whether it's debt or equity or property.
Yeah, Kitty Ussher.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a few other perspectives on the scale-up question that perhaps will be useful to the committee from the work that we've done. The first is this debate is very understandably quite often about private capital, but public markets should also ideally play a role in scale-up capital. And I'm thinking in particular about the transition from the junior markets, AIM, for example, in the UK to the main market. We did some work on this and found that there's actually some barriers to that transition, which then if you're an entrepreneur, you might think, oh, well, there's no point going to the junior market as a route to the main market, so we'll just wait and stay private, and then of course potentially they may go outside the UK. So for example, if you've had a firm functioning very well on a junior market, we suggest it might be sensible to ease the transition to the main market, for example, by not having to do a new prospectus if you've already traded publicly in a way that investors are very comfortable with. And there are also some tax advantages in the junior markets that aren't in place for the main market, EIS and SEIS and VCTs being the obvious example. So we're suggesting some kind of taper, so there's a real advantage to staying in the UK. And a couple of other quick points, if I may. We haven't talked about gender. There's a systemic gender issue in the UK in terms of being able to attract funding. Female-only founders received 1.8% of all VC equity investment in the first half of last year. I don't know if that's related to the fact that 11% of VC committee members are female, but it may be more than just a correlation. Barclays chairs the Invest in Women Task Force, which is doing some really interesting work here. I don't have the solution, Mr. Chairman, but this is something that we're going to shine a bit more of a light on. I think it is firmly within the scope of this inquiry.
Yeah.
Final small thing, we did some work with firms all over the UK that were at the cusp of considering where to go for equity investment. So they may not be sort of hugely knowledgeable about how to do so. And we asked them what the role was for local authorities and other devolved organisations in helping them along their way. There was massive demand for signposting information and support, and they saw it as part of the role alongside banks and other financial services institutions. They really saw a very strong role for devolved and local public administrations as well. And one thing that the BBB might find interesting is that we found that branding actually makes a really important difference here, that if they felt there was a front end that felt place-based, it would feel much more accessible to them. And I know that there are some examples of that around the country, but I think it's a bit of a...
We will get into this broader question of crowding in private investment, but let's just start with Mr. Cooper on this.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you're talking about pools of finance, which is wonderful to hear, but one of the main aims of the industrial strategy is to attract international mobile investment. You seem quite confident that domestically we'll achieve that. I just wonder how confident you are if we can pull in money from out with the UK, and then probably more substantially, what involvement have you had as financial institutions? Have you had in the design of this industrial strategy? Have you been partners in this, or is this something that's being handed down to you? I could maybe start with you, Mr. Flint.
Thank you. So the first part of the question, how confident am I that we can attract international capital? Increasingly confident, and that's largely because of what's happening in the US rather than what's happening here. So the US is making itself uninvestable, and that secular trend of us mechanically investing into the S&P, I think has probably come to a bit of a close. So it's all to compete for now. I think the US has done itself significant damage that we can benefit from. Forgive me, the second part of the question.
The part of it really is what involvement, if any, you've had in actually developing this strategy. Yeah.
Yes, so we have been involved. The organisation's 4 years old. We've got a great policy and strategy team that's largely come from government departments. So each of the sectors that sits behind the industrial strategy has engaged with us to seek our input. Departments have been in the driving seat. It's not for us to kind of drive the creation of the strategy, but where we've got sector expertise, it's been called upon and we've contributed.
Right. Taylor?
I think that it's very important to have overseas capital coming into the UK, but it is, I think, disproportionately important at the moment, given the paucity of domestic institutional capital, to make sure there is a suitable domestic counterbalance in order to retain companies in the UK. They tend to gravitate to where their capital came from, and without any UK capital at a late stage on their cap table, they will gravitate elsewhere. Just to the point they become economically interesting. In the context of the industrial strategy, we've been very close to the Department of Business and Trade and the Treasury, and also other departments, DCIT, DESNES, in particular transport as well. We already invest quite heavily in all 8 of the sectors broadly, so we do have some expertise there. We have given the government an opportunity to give us more resource pretty much at the efficiency frontier of where we will be crowding money in still rather than crowding money out. And how much of that they want to do is a matter for ministers, but we've given them options around that, around a very clear set of skills around which we would build the interventions we're able to do.
Can I just check, Mr. Taylor, then, do you have views about this point of, for example, either mandating or driving up domestic investment through consolidation of pension funds? I mean, do you have views on what kind of reforms might be needed to ensure that there is a domestic capital match to that overseas capital coming in?
Well, there was discussion just a moment ago of the tax benefit that individuals get as they put money into a pension scheme, and a failure to invest a proportion in the UK could cause a clawing back of that, which means that people don't have to invest. It's not mandated, but there's a consequence to it. And those sorts of interventions, whilst retaining the kind of threat, perhaps, of mandation, may be the right place, because it's also about a fundamental question of risk appetite. To John's earlier point about his liquid air example, about there not being the risk appetite on something novel, it would be funded in the US, I can tell you. And we really need to have more risk appetite across all of our investment institutions.
Do you think then, Mr. Taylor, that you have the latitude to take the kinds of risks that perhaps are going to be needed to deliver the industrial strategy?
I think we do. I mean, we're inherently taking a lot of risk. And as John has talked about with his economic capital model, that is a righteous amount of risk to be taking. I mean, government organisations should be doing what only government can. And taking those kinds of risks is part and parcel of that. So it's not that we are, wantonly taking risk. It's calculated. It's, based on whether we think that, firstly, a technology works, but then whether it has commercial value, and then whether it's realistic to be able to realise that commercial value. But we're trying to catalyse private money alongside us and give a halo effect by putting some money in, largely on a pari passu basis. But as John said, we've got interventions that have some element of skew in order to correct market failure.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Godfrey, same sort of question to you. What's your thoughts on international finance, and again, what involvement have you had in shaping this strategy?
I think, the simple answer is we need both domestic capital and international capital. It's a global fact that capital is mobile, and so if we can set our stall out in the right way with the right incentives and the right attractions here, then the international capital will flow. One of those attractions, as John Flint has already said, is that we now look like a predictable and stable place in which to make an investment. And that's obviously a comparative analysis, but that's got to be helpful, and it's important the government retains that. Predictability and stability is really important to investors, whether they're in this country or anywhere else. I think on international capital, the work that Richard Harrington did in his report is extremely powerful. And again, we recall, Henry Kissinger had that famous question, when I want to talk to Europe, who do I pick the phone up to? And you have a little bit the same problem if you're somewhere and you want to invest in this country.
I'm sure we've solved that problem.
Who do you speak to? And so the one-stop shop, which was part of the Harrington suite of recommendations, and is part of what, as you know, I've been talking about with domestic capital, is really important in this space.
Who do you ring now then?
Well, in the UK, who would you call? I mean, the problem is you would ring DBT, and then you may have to ring DFH, you may have to ring OFI, you may have to ring etc.
We may not have wholly solved that problem.
We've not wholly solved that problem, but we have, I think, a version of what the answer to that problem may be. We have to implement it. That's what we need to do. Just on input to the industrial strategy, I mean, the TheCityUK is a member body for the industry, so we have contributed like any other public body in terms of responses.
Fit in, yeah.
And we've been at round tables, but that's about it.
Anything else to feed in on that?
I think I'm broadly of the same mind as other panellists. I think the Harrington Review is an extremely good piece of work. International perceptions of the investability of a country are currently working in Britain's favour, but they haven't done in the relatively recent past, which I think just goes to show how important it is to have predictability and certainty in a long-term view coming from the government. And almost in times of geopolitical uncertainty, public policy needs to work even harder to provide that kind of bubble within which businesses can invest. In terms of the industrials, we've offered our expertise both sectorally and as an FS player.
Thank you. Good point.
Yeah, we've touched on some of this already, which is about how does the government finally maximise the crowding in of private capital. And some of your answers, you talked about the Harrington Review. I mean, one of the things in that is it said international peers are more strategic, better organised, and attracting global mobile investment. First of all, do you agree with that? And then secondly, beyond what you've already answered, what would you think the government should do in order to be that more attractive place to crowd in investment, and perhaps start with you, Kitty?
I think the Harrington Review, while not professing to be an expert, did lay out some really important recommendations about the one-stop shop, so that there was a place that was specifically designed to bring in FDI investment and was resourced appropriately to be able to do that, fixing whatever questions and problems came up on a case-by-case basis. And I do think that's very important. Tempting to make a sort of facetious point about the fact that we're an international investment bank, so we can also provide advisory services, but obviously there are private sector players there as well.
Perhaps in the panel, John, I mean, you've mentioned one or two things, but is there anything further you think the government should be doing?
Well, at the risk of being a bit of a cracked record, I think it is about where are the investable propositions, and that I think applies for domestic investors as well as international investors. I think then there is a question of being properly joined up, not just between government departments and institutions, but across different policy areas. So if I were an international investor looking to invest, so I'll just pick an example, in let's say the town plan in Wednesbury in the West Midlands, I would want to know how is that developing in terms of financeability, what is the planning position. If I have a winning proposition to invest in there, am I going to be caught up in some monster procurement process? How does all this come together so that I can actually basically effect a quick transaction on a set of known...
But is this a mechanism that you could build out of the Office of Investment? So if we're trying to fix the Godfrey gap that you've described on the panel this afternoon, I mean, is the Office of Investment the place in which you build that, or is it the British Business Bank, or is it the National Wealth Fund? I mean, where's the locus for this?
I think from an investor perspective, the position is probably largely agnostic about where it actually sits, providing it works. I mean, there is clearly an advantage of having a level of government sponsorship sitting behind it, whether that means it should be directly in a government department or in a quasi-governmental body of some sort at one remove. I think either has pros and cons. The thing that is the toughest nut to crack with this is how do you staff it with the appropriate people and the appropriate skills. And there I think you go back to the fact that just trying to second people from investors doesn't really work terribly well historically. Staffing it with civil servants doesn't necessarily work because they don't have the same skill sets. So how do you tap into this quite rich and regionally diverse group of financially literate people that you have largely sitting in the Big Four accounting?
Okay. Mr. Taylor, views on how we do more to crowd in private
I think
investment?
that there's obviously an advantage to having a single telephone number to call, and I think other countries do that better, but that's to ignore some of the other advantages that we have that we really don't play on enough. So as an innovation ecosystem, the UK is second only to the US, I think, Sweden and Switzerland. Relative to our economy, we are really the place for innovation. So if you're a US investor who's focused on innovation but don't like political instability, right here is where you come to get that. And we don't talk about that enough and open it up enough to investors. So it's overseas investors, but it's domestic investors as well that we need. The British Business Bank as a mechanism, we were already the largest investor in venture and growth equity in the UK. We are about 18% of the market. There's a limit in a free market economy as to how much of this stuff the government really should be doing. Yeah. And that comes back to my earlier point about risk appetite, that there is a lot of slack for the private sector to be able to take up. I say slack because actually it is phenomenal opportunity in the growth companies that our universities are spawning. And we are an entrepreneurial country. We have no problem setting up businesses. 850,000 companies registered at Companies House last year. We're starting a lot of businesses, we're incubating them well, but we're not backing them at that scale-up stage, which is when they are getting to need institutional capital, and it's not there.
And so perhaps that is the moment where more crowding in needs to be happening. Is that your view?
Scale-up capital.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Flint, what's your view?
Thank you. So I really do think that OFI is the right place to be the focal point for this because of its proximity or relationship with DBT, that is the architect of the industrial strategy. And the reason this is so important is when we talk about wanting foreign investment into the UK, we need to get much clearer about what we want investment into and also who from and in what form. Because not all investment is the same. Do we want, we're trying to get out of a situation now where we are hostage from an energy perspective to petrodollar states. 20 years from now, how would we feel if they end up owning all of our offshore wind sector? Right? So we just need to get really clear about this foreign investment issue. Where do we want people to invest?
The implication of that answer is that we're not 100% clear today.
I don't think we're clear today, but I think the industrial strategy provides a foundation. The next set of questions then is, right, if we translate that industrial strategy into an investment strategy, where do we think the gaps are? Where's the government support going to come from? It's not just us, it's revenue support mechanisms, CFDs, RABs, etc. Then you can really start to get traction. And I think the set of skills, the relationship management skills in navigating with sovereign wealth funds and the large foreign investors, that sits outside, I think, our organisations at the moment.
We're running out of time, so I'm going to come to Antonia Vance to wrap up.
Very quickly, I appreciated, thank you Mr Godfrey, the reference to Wednesbury. And if anyone would like to invest in Wednesbury, I'd love to talk to them. We'll make time immediately after this meeting. Of course, the previous panel
You don't
would
get
have
offers
said,
like that every day, do you?
the previous panel would have said the answer to the question of who should someone talk to about Wednesbury would be Business Growth West Midlands, the Mayor's Executive Agency for growing the Black Country and the wider mayoral region. Would that be your sense? Is there a role for the devolved institutions there?
Well, first of all, I have actually been round the site, so it's not a totally random example. There is certainly a big role for the devolved institutions because they have the right level of knowledge at the ground. Where, in my experience, having worked at the combined authority there for some time, where they struggle is to say, okay, how does this translate into, we need £70 million worth of equity, we need £100 million worth of debt, the cash flow is this, the risk profile is that, and that level of detail. So I think there is a sort of collaboration or handing off process that has to happen at some point.
I'm just going to get the term sheet ready. Thank you. Lola, any final points? No? Folks, that has been incredibly helpful in helping us work out what we need to recommend for our industrial strategy report. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for such full and candid evidence today. That concludes this panel. Order. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Order. Welcome to this third panel of today's hearings of the Business and Trade Committee as we pursue our review of institutions needed to help ensure the industrial strategy is a success. Mr. Clifford, I know you've got to exit in about 20 minutes' time, so perhaps I can start with you. Could you just give us a quick sense of how important are Britain's R&D institutions to the government fulfilling its industrial strategy ambitions?
Well, thank you, and thank you for accommodating my meeting, which I apologise for. I think it's absolutely essential. I think R&D is one of the very few things that we know fuels economic growth, particularly in the medium and long term. That makes it both essential and challenging, because, of course, funding things for the long term is particularly hard in a democracy. And so, I think it's to the enormous credit of this and previous governments that we've made that long-term commitment to funding R&D. And I think in order to make that work and deliver the economic growth, which is obviously the government's top priority, you need a diversity of institutions, many of which are represented at the table today. So, yes, I think without a robust R&D strategy and a plan of how you turn R&D into real-world impact, I think it's going to be very challenging to deliver the industrial strategy.
Okay, Professor Morgan, what's your view?
Yeah, and firstly, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me today. So I would echo these comments. I think R&D is absolutely critical to economic growth in terms of the stickiness that you can achieve by working through the life cycle of innovation, from low TRL, from academia through the so-called Valley of Death with the catapult centres of which I represent, through to commercialisation, and that is absolutely critical. We've seen some fantastic examples of that. One of the examples was working with Rolls-Royce. We supported Rolls-Royce's UK DIS facility, a brand new facility up on Washington in the Tyne and Wear. £100 million investment. The AMRC supported about a 50% productivity saving on that product. That product could have gone globally, so it supported jobs, it secured that work in the UK, and just one example of why it's critical.
Okay, Mr. Biddle.
I think R&D is fundamental to an industrial strategy for our country for the long term. If we knew how to do it, we'd have done it already, and I think R&D is a way to actually explore the things that need to be done. I think part of that actually will have, by having the focus of the growth sectors, you can then start to say, what are those North Stars, what are the guiding lights, where might we invest, how can you build across, grow locally and go global in terms of actually reaching export markets as well. And I think fundamentally you can actually invest in R&D for the long term as well. We know from Innovate UK analysis independently that every pound of investment generates £3.60 of direct benefit to the economy. And actually, if you actually look in a wider spillover effects, it's about 7 to 1.
Mr. Westlake, hopefully you're not going to demur.
I'm not going to disagree, but I guess what I would build on that is to say it's incredibly important that public R&D institutions interface well with the rest of the system if we want to achieve these benefits. So working with businesses, we get £3 of business investment in the UK economy for every pound of public investment going in, and that's crucial. Working with businesses as employers, one of the things we produce is not just the ideas that come out of universities, but also the skilled people who do PhDs and then go to do fantastic jobs in innovative businesses. And then even things like the interaction with the planning system. If you want to get people making businesses out of good ideas, it's got to be possible to set up businesses and for workers to live affordably around where those businesses are. So getting those connections right is also vital.
Okay. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you're obviously convinced of the importance of R&D in driving that growth, but do you think that we have the right institutions, the right R&D institutions to ensure that the industrial strategy succeeds? And if you don't, can you see any obvious gaps? Is there something that we should be filling at all? I'll start with you, Mr. Clifford.
I do think we do have those institutions, and the key, I think...
I just want to check this. So basically you think the institutional setup we've got right now is all good?
I think there are lots of challenges, but I do think we have institutions that are fit for purpose to deliver on the core purpose of R&D, which...
We're not missing any.
Well, I think what we've done is create institutions with enough flexibility that we can actually do a lot with what we've got. I'm here as chair of ARIA, the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, which I think may be the newest R&D funding agency in the UK. Obviously, I'm slightly biased, but I think ARIA added a great deal of institutional flexibility to what we do across the ecosystem. But I think the key at this stage is we need to make sure that the institutions that we've got are, yes, well-funded and also well-functioning. And to sort of build on Stian's point, I think actually the key thing is to make sure that our public sector R&D institutions have the right interfaces and interface well with the private sector. Overheard the last conversation with the previous panel about capital. I do think that one of the key things we need to do is less about creating new institutions and more about building the connective tissue between the institutions we have up and down the value chain.
Morgan, you again, do you think the same, that the situation is pretty good, that we've got that flexibility, that if something comes along, that obviously unknown unknowns, but if something comes along, we can jump on that?
I think in my experience we do. I think to qualify, we've got lots of institutions across funding bodies, universities, catapults in that applied research space. And we've got the regional bodies as well, the MCAs, the trade bodies, various different players. I think they're all pointing in the right direction. I would echo the point really. I think particularly as the high value manufacturing catapult, we've worked hard to bridge some of the gaps, to be the convener between some of these institutions. I think to sharpen it, previous session on finance, I think in my experience when talking with industry, I think there's questions around access to finance as businesses scale. So I think we can sharpen there. I think there's something there. I think around probably a slightly separate point, but government procurement, the use of government procurement, particularly around large programmes, could need new institutions to guide that funding, because certainly some of those big programmes could really turbocharge supply chains and give certainty.
Is that the missing link then? I mean, we've taken evidence from, say, AstraZeneca in life science, we've taken evidence from a lot of the defence companies. Both of them tell a pretty poor story about the way in which we use government procurement to provide those advanced market commitments or advanced market clarity that might be positive signals to investors.
I think you've got a good opportunity. I think if I take SMR, UK SMR at the moment, example. I think there's a fantastic opportunity there to make a decision that will, I think, have global impact. I think the UK has a good opportunity to be really seen as a leader. The businesses I work with, a lot of heavy industry, precision machining, casting, those types of business, that would give them the certainty alongside the industrial strategy to invest for growth, for jobs, for productivity.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Biddle.
If I can build on that point about procurement, I think there is an opportunity here. It requires quite a lot of quite dry, detailed work. So, for example, something that's been going on at the Cabinet Office at the moment, they are taking a long-established programme that used to be called Small Business Research Initiative and then was briefly called Contracts for Innovation, and linking it to mainstream procurement, which sounds like a small change, but it's actually very important in allowing things to work through. I think there's an even bigger opportunity with the fact that the government has now missions and the plan for change to tie those missions through to public procurement.
Just push this point about missions though, because actually we've taken some evidence that suggested that missions is a pretty wishy-washy, wide-ended, very vague way to approach this, and actually the more recent approach of specifying grand challenges might be a better way of mobilising this. I think you were involved in some of that work about a decade ago. Is grand challenges a better way of articulating and mobilising than missions, or actually does it not matter?
I mean, I think I'm struggling to some extent to see the difference, because the work, for example, the work that I'm doing with Patrick Vallance on the R&D Missions Accelerator programme that he's working up is very much a challenge-led approach to missions. So saying, how do we specifically want to help, for example, children with special educational needs? How can we use technology to do that?
Let me put it this way. So if you take the industrial policy, it's got 8 priority sectors. Those sectors don't look wholly aligned to the research funding that you've collectively got in place between you. I mean, is there a way of, or is there a need for us to actually define a better way to align the money that you're pouring into R&D with the industrial strategy ambitions? Because at the moment, it's quite hard to see the join up between the two.
That's a good question. I think it also depends a little bit sector by sector when we look at the 8 sectors in the industrial strategy. There are some sectors that are extremely, that know that they're dependent on R&D. So, for example, in the defence sector, there are a set of institutions that combine those things. UKRI and others have a bunch of programs that put R&D money into those, and there are the mechanisms to pick those things up. with, say, financial services or professional and business services, two of the other sectors. We do that more at a program-by-program level. So we have some ongoing industrial strategy programs looking at how to make use of R&D, like, for example, AI in financial services sectors. I don't think it would make sense for us to change our entire organisational structure around that. But what matters is that we see those connections and we build the relationships with DBT and others in government who are...
So how are your research programmes at the moment connected to the 8 sectors that are set out in the industrial strategy?
So we have, one of the things that we did in the early stages of the industrial strategy was mapped the various initiatives that we have in place. And we have a range of programmes in all the 8 areas. And mapped them to the sectors and then made sure that that link had been made with DBT so that they knew what was going on, that we connected with the sector teams. There's also, which I was less close to, a lot of work being done in Whitehall between the DCIT officials and the DBT officials to say how can we make sure we connect those things. So again, it was sort of quite detailed blocking and tackling, but the aim was to make sure that the connections were there.
So do you have a sense of how much of the budget that is in UKRI land at the moment is actually lined up to the 8 sectors? Obviously, the industrial strategy is not the entirety of Britain's research ambitions. We wouldn't expect it to be 100%. But how do we as a committee kind of understand how much research money that comes from the taxpayer is actually supporting the industrial strategy? Because at the moment, it's pretty impossible to figure out.
So we pull together those numbers for DBT, although I can't tell you them off the top of my head. We can send them to the committee afterwards. So it's an important question because we need to make sure we're aligned.
Okay, and in ARIA, can we see that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point I was making about a diversity of institutions. So like, one of the explicit points of ARIA actually in the statute is for ARIA to take a very long-term view and not to take direction from government on what it should research. And that's deliberate. That's partly because actually the industrial strategy rightly focuses on what are the UK's current strengths and opportunities. Part of ARIA's mission is to think about what is the £1 trillion industry of the future that doesn't exist today. So we are loosely modelled on DARPA in the US. And actually, when you think about why has DARPA been so successful, it's partly by pursuing things that were unfashionable, sometimes ridiculous, frankly, at the time, in order to have extraordinarily big outcomes in future. So, one of the most ridiculed DARPA ideas was the idea of mRNA vaccines. The idea that should be something that public money went on when some people thought it was literally, science fiction. And of course, how much would we have paid? How much would we have paid to have that during the pandemic? It turns out an awful lot. And so ARIA, there is a huge overlap between what we do and the industrial strategy, but I would be completely candid to say that is accidental. That is because we're making big bets on what we think the £1 trillion industries of the future are. Some of those we're already working on, like energy efficient computational power, very important in the industrial strategy, very important to ARIA. But some of them, we have a big bet on precision neurotech, which isn't there, but we think it's absolutely the right bet to make for 2035, for example.
Yeah. Okay, Antonio Pence.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you tell us about, and this is to the whole panel, can you tell us about the best examples of UK research and development institutions supporting industrial strategy today? What lessons can we take from these success stories, and what barriers are in the way of us spreading this approach to the 8 sectors earmarked by the government? So if I go that way, well, maybe I'll start in the middle, actually. Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. So I think for me, one of the big things that we've learned through the past decades is about consistency of purpose, actually. So when you've got the policies there and you can see that there's a long-term commitment to them, you can actually then build programs around them, you can build industries around them. If I think back to some of the work that we started back in 2007, 2008 around low-carbon vehicles, that actually set the ground for some of the things which is now actually the electric vehicle revolution that we've all got around us. It also then brings it comes back to the previous question as well around the plurality of institutions, as well as being exec director at Innovate UK. I'm also a non-exec director of the Advanced Propulsion Centre, and there's an example of where you've actually got the plurality of the system across the UK, where you can actually build programs together where R&D can actually then enable the opportunities of the future and the growth industries of the future. So I think that for me is the area where we can do it, but it does then need that constancy of purpose. And there are examples that I can also think of where we haven't had that, and then certain R&D programs haven't necessarily extracted the value that we immediately thought, but there have then been spin-over benefits into things like cybersecurity and things like that.
Thank you. Professor Morgan?
So I think from my perspective, it's been where there's been a really strong industry pull, and that has been matched in the research ecosystem with the so-called three-legged stool, which is innovation and driving innovation, as I say, from a kind of mid-low TRL through to make business globally competitive. It's around skills. So if we can create the factories, we've got the innovation, we've got to fill those factories with good, trained up, skilled people. And that's both at an apprenticeship, advanced apprenticeship level. It's also PhDs, doctorates and lifelong learning. And the third piece, and possibly most importantly, is around the supply chain and bringing all those businesses together for a turnkey solution, which creates, again, the stickiness to the UK. So they're sort of the key ingredients, if you like, to some of those success stories. And we'd like to say that Sheffield and South Yorkshire is one of those, with over £300 million of foreign direct investment that's landed on the old Orgreave colliery. So that's one of the examples. There are barriers, of course. Things like infrastructure. You know, I think both highways, rail, public transport, but also power to sites. Very, very critical for advanced manufacturing business as well.
Mr. Clifford, before you depart.
So I think, I mean, there are lots of examples, I would say, within the ARIA portfolio that sort of touch on the industrial strategy. But maybe the thing I would actually highlight is something that we've done very proactively to address some of what you heard on the last panel and on this panel about the gap between R&D and commercialization, access to finance, and the sort of the broader ecosystem. So one of the things that we've chosen to do at ARIA is to have a program-sized allocation of budget to what we call activation partnerships. Activation partnerships are our effort to crowd in capital, talent, expertise, scaling expertise in particular, into the ecosystem. So this is seeking out partners to R&D actors who can help things go to market and scale, which I do think, and in fact, the industrial strategy points to the pace of tech adoption in the UK as one of the biggest growth challenges. So the sorts of things that this is enabling is bringing some of the best and most successful deep tech investors from the US, and in particular California, to the UK, open UK offices. It's funding, for example, an NHS trust to be an early adopter of health technology so that the things that we fund in R&D can have a faster go-to-market. And so I think we think that there's a really important role, especially for ARIA, which has such a strong mandate around doing things differently, to think of not just the science and the tech that we're funding, but also how we build that connective tissue that means that it actually gets to market and gets to scale.
I'm conscious, Mr. Clifford, that I need to release both you and Ms. Bance. So thank you very much indeed. And let me hand to George Freeman.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I have one question for Mr. Clifford before we go.
I'll take one question.
As a minister, very proud to have brought the ARIA bill through Parliament. It's very nice to have you here. I have two questions I really wanted to invite you first and then the others. One is just on technologies, changing the world, attracting huge investment, creating new industries. If this industrial strategy is partly about capturing UK leadership in new technologies for new industries, I wanted to ask, firstly, do you think, is that coming through enough? Because the list I'd be looking to communicate as a trade envoy around the world is AI, life sciences, robotics, SMR, quantum. The list I see is kind of the economy divided up into sectors. So I just wonder, in terms of technologies, what you feel we should be communicating around the world as, look, this is where the UK really punches above its weight. And linked to that is ecosystem. The world is changing, right? We've got huge new philanthropic investors. Larry Ellison's put thick end of $10 billion down.
I'm conscious you've got 1 minute, Mr. Clifford. So
here's what I would say. I would say that I think the areas of focus are the right ones, but clearly they're vast, and between them, I think it's 30 or 40% of the economy. Others would know better. So it's a big chunk of the economy. The thing that I think is key from an ARIA perspective is to make very focused, very deep bets within those areas. So let me give you a very concrete example. Clearly, AI is an area that everyone's excited about. The reason I have to run off is my other job is as the Prime Minister's advisor on AI. Now, AI is vast and important. The specific bet that ARIA is making is saying we're going to need more energy efficient compute. compute is one of the main ingredients of modern AI. It's extremely energy intensive. There will be a requirement for more energy efficient compute. Can the UK be the global home of that? I think so, yes. We've put, I think, something like 70 million to work on energy efficient compute in ARIA. But I think what we need to do is take these focus areas and then make these very granular but very deep bets in where the UK can build trillion-pound industries where we're the natural leader. Thank you, and apologies again, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clifford. Mr. Freeman, do go where you want to go with our remaining witnesses.
Thank you. So, it's the same question, really. I mean, from a catapult, from a UKRI, from each of your perspectives, how important is it, do you think, that we communicate globally, and I say this as a trade envoy in Asia Pacific, that we recognise we're in a global race and there are some technology areas that the UK is very, very powerful in, very strong in, so come here to invest in them. And in the context of an industrial strategy, that old tension between telling the world that the UK is very good at AI, great, how do I invest in it? And then cluster mapping, well, you could go into quantum, you could go into Edinburgh. Your reflections really on how we get that balance right globally.
So, perhaps if I could start, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think we shout about some of the brilliant assets that the UK has across the technology landscape. I think it sort of links for me a little bit back to the grand challenges versus the sectoral approach. I think with the sectoral approach that we see, on the Advanced Manufacturing Sector Plan and the IS more broadly, we're building on capability that we have, and we're looking to strengthen and empower those sectors. But we're using the technology, and the technology stands in its own right, but it also needs to be applied. So I think, I'm kind of answering the previous question almost, but I think...
I'm quite interested in whether you think there is a role for both grand challenges and...
I do.
More, you do?
I do. I think there is a hybrid approach, because right. I think when you work cross-sectorally, you're sometimes, so in terms of a grand challenge, maybe across a technology...
Which is what we noticed the Japanese industrial policy doing, by the way. It's a mixture of missions and grand challenges.
I think you can be slow to get to market, and we need to be quick to get to market with new products. We need it for climate change, we need it for energy security, we need it for national security. We need to move at pace. But where grand challenges and the technology comes in, I think, is where we can get the diversity of working cross-sectorally. We can get the economies of scale. It's things like digital. It's the ontologies of a digital twin. I don't want to go into that. I haven't got time. But working across those things, they can be common across sectors. We could be selling our digital capability far more.
So I think for me, one of the bits that we can do actually is, talk about the opportunity we have across the UK in terms of the testbed. We are a great place to try these things, and I think, George, you've spoken about some of that before as well. So, and I think that does actually get to the strengths of the UK system. The things that I look after now are more in the net zero space. It is one of the areas, clean energy, as part of one of those priority growth sectors. And I think we have shown that we can do that in a way that will actually spread benefit across the UK. So industrial decarbonisation challenge, which is actually as one of the previous challenges from the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund launched under the previous government, that is actually, by its very nature, where those clusters are across the UK, when you decarbonise them, and you need technology to decarbonise them, you're going to be in places that are not the Greater South East because of where those clusters are. But the 6 clusters outside of London are actually responsible for about half of the emissions of the country. So by actually sort of saying we need to tackle that, nobody actually knows how to do it yet at scale. And then the things that we have been funding has actually shown a pathway to that, which now Department of Energy Security and Net Zero is taking forward. Hopefully with their further programmes, we'll see what comes. But the work that we've already done in partnership with them is on track to sort of save 11 million tonnes of carbon by 2030 annually, and possibly even as many as 18 million tonnes. The co-investment, though, as well, is actually 4 times, I think, so we're nearly at £1 billion of co-investment that's already realised through that. So, again, that gets to some of the conversations you've had earlier about, and you've heard from the other witnesses, which is how do you get the public money to drive the private money and investment. So I think for me, that's the piece. It's about bringing that all together.
Mr. Westlake.
I mean, I think this comes back, Chair, to your point earlier, that you do need a mixture of a kind of demand-led approach and an approach based on challenges in technologies. I think then where it comes back to the question you asked is that in addition to doing those, to being a little bit ambidextrous from that point of view, we as UKRI and other organisations need to make sure we're doing that sense-making so that other people, investors, businesses, can really understand what's going on there. And I think one of the things I reflect on there is the work that you put in place in your ministerial days to do cluster mapping and to say, how can we demonstrate what's going on? One of the capabilities that UKRI has been investing in recently, I mean, we call it a meta-science capability, but effectively it's the ability to understand what we're doing and to tell that story effectively. And I think that's particularly powerful in the world of industrial strategy and technologies, because it allows us not just to hold ourselves to account, but also to tell potential partners, potential overseas investors, what's the UK really good at and where are the opportunities to invest.
Okay, slightly against this, but let me turn this to West.
I guess sort of one of the questions, I'm sorry I had to pop out, so I missed some of the evidence you were giving, and maybe you heard the previous session, but I'm really interested to know what your thoughts are about the financial side of innovation, and not just simply to talk about government funding and research to innovation, the allocation to innovation, but also how we were talking about scale-ups before. How do you think that we have a culture in this country that satisfies the development from idea innovation into commercial opportunity? So it's a question about culture. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'll start. So I think there's plenty of opportunity, but I don't necessarily think we seize them as much as we could do. So I think actually it's about why can't you grow in the UK, and you absolutely can. So we're very good at the start. We're starting to get better at the scale. We also need to make sure, obviously, that those companies then stay for the future. And I think we've got examples where that's happened, but there are probably too many where we haven't captured all of the value that we could have done. So I think actually one of the things that we're looking to do through the coming years is build on the work we have been doing to actually start to make sure that you don't just start things, you do scale them and you do get them to a point where they will actually stay in the UK, which gets to some of the stickiness that Ben was talking about earlier as well.
So the short answer in terms of both appetite for risk and finance risk is we could certainly do better. Pushing Mansion House to get more access to capital, supporting more entrepreneurs, and particularly one of the ways that happens is because they get mentored by the previous generation of successful entrepreneurs. All of those things are worth doing and will help. What I would caveat, though, is I've been around the world and asked people questions about innovation and innovation policy in almost every country I can think of, and every country seems to think that their country has a unique problem, that they're not as good at turning ideas into businesses as they ought to be. You even hear this in places like Germany and Israel, that we would be envious of their performance. And I sometimes think that's because we all compare ourselves with the US, and the US is the one place that has a hyperactive venture capital sector doing really well. So I guess what I mean by that is, by all means, let's try and do better. I think it's wrong to beat ourselves up and think that the UK has a specific and unique problem.
Do you think we were recently in Japan, and we saw evidence of a particular approach where they were actively encouraging innovative, startup businesses to come to Japan and look at developing their idea there in Japan. So from Israel, Canada, a lot of businesses. So a real startup were looking to scale. And so Japan was actively looking to bring in some of the best and great ideas from around the world. Is that something you think we could also be doing? Maybe Professor Morgan. Sorry.
I think it absolutely is, yes. We've got some absolutely world-class, particularly if we start to, if you focus on hard tech, for instance, that's more my background, more my speciality. We've got some fantastic assets that the world can use, right? So the manufacturing assets, I think around 800 million of capital assets across the high-value manufacturing capital network. that can be used to prototype, to scale, to plan, from a design and engineering piece through to scale up and factory development piece as well. So there is a fantastic opportunity. I think it's quite, it's becoming more of an active space in the UK. I totally agree that there is a kind of a cultural problem. You spend any time in MIT or these types of places, people fail and they get on with it, pick themselves back up. And I think in the UK there is a bit more of a fear of failure rather than embracing that. So there's a cultural piece, and whether there's kind of more entrepreneurial work we can do in the education sector earlier on in people's development. But I do think we have a great opportunity to, and where we've seen kind of particular success with startups and spin-outs, it's where we've had some industrial pull plus a kind of a minimum viable product. So there's already a market there. That makes it much easier for the investors to come in and support that business because they know there's a multinational or a large or an SME or willing to pay and put money down for that product.
Okay. So what we've heard this afternoon is some mayors tell us about the need for devolved skills funding. We've had some banks tell us about the need to sort out their capital market a bit, and you've given us some really useful insights into how we can enrich the flow of ideas. So between the people, the money and the ideas, we've covered a lot of territory this afternoon. Just the last question is, how often do you talk to the other people that we've had through the committee today? How often do you hang out with the head of the British Business Bank or the National Wealth Fund, Mr. Westlake?
I start. So
yeah.
If I start with metropolitan combined authorities and mayors, that's probably the most important link of those that we have. And we have funded things like innovation accelerators, which was an investment to build the ability of metropolitan combined authorities to invest in innovation. We're in the process, and obviously all of this is subject to spending review, but to design the next investment programme so that metropolitan combined authorities can be making those local R&I investments. And I think it's been a real success story how metropolitan combined authorities have grown in ambition and grown in connectivity in their areas. So that's a really important link. We connect a fair amount with the British Business Bank in the more applied end of what we do. It's less a part of my business, but more Mike's and EPSRC's. And I think that link, there's potential to strengthen it, there's potential to share more data and potential to get even better at how we understand. And obviously, we work closely with the skills agenda, particularly when it comes to the advanced skills that we are delivering, like PhD skills in particular. But I think you can never really have too much connectivity in this area.
Okay. One of our reasons that we exist is to hang out with these people with purpose, right? So in terms of the regional piece, we've got 9 local action plans which are actually looking at how do you explore and actually understand some of the cluster opportunities. Andy talked about that earlier. So we've got those local action plans in place. Actually got a specific MOU as well with Manchester for certain activities. In terms of trying to build that pipeline for the scale and the stay piece, we've been working much closer with British Business Bank over the past few years, and really trying to sort of make sure that there's that path in terms of the idea space and the things you might grant fund, the things you might provide a loan for, and then how do you provide access to some of that scaling capital. And I think for me, actually, fundamentally, we need to think about the UK as a system. Innovate UK is there to help map that system and actually connect across it. So hanging out with purpose is what we're here to do.
Okay. Morgan, finally.
So I think particularly around the mayoral combined authority. So we work very closely with Welsh Government, where we have a facility in North Wales and in South Wales as well. But we've got a very good relationship with the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority with Oliver Coppard. He's a big advocate of advanced manufacturing, it being a key part of the heritage of Sheffield, of course, part of our DNA. And we're very well supported, and that has leveraged globally mobile programmes of R&D, most recently a big programme with Boeing, the Composites at Speed and Scale. It's about an £80 million kind of R&D programme, which has huge opportunity for the next generation of short-haul aircraft to land that work, big export opportunity for the UK. Where I think there's a little bit of work to do from perhaps from my perspective is with British Business Bank and particularly on the finance side. I think where we've operated more has been at the angel investment, the private equity, that kind of earlier stage, which is probably why I highlight that scale-up stage as somewhere where there's a bit of work to do.
Yeah, some common patterns emerging. Thank you very much indeed. That has been very clear evidence. We're really grateful to you in helping us get this report right. That concludes this panel and that concludes this session. Order, order.